First item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. All stand, please flag. Pledge of
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's have the roll starting.
Commissioner Winscott. Commissioner Hidden.
Mr. Songstad.
Commissioner Davis.
Okay, we have a quorum. Any announcements? Mr. Gavell? Got a long walk. Oh, going to there.
I was going to go here. There's no microphone there. So just as a heads up, the next scheduled workshop with the board is next Monday at 1:30. I'll ensure that the correct Zoom link is sent out to everybody so you guys can join that meeting, or feel free to join here in person. I believe we're back in this room for the next month because elections has the downstairs EOC.
Late.
So that is the only announcement I have.
Okay. We'll move to the consent agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of April 22nd, 2025. Any modifications, corrections, additions, objections? Nope. Hearing none, consent agenda is approved. We'll move to public comment. State your name, please.
I want to kind of go over something real fast. My name is Calvin Nolan. I live up on Mud Gulch. And been going through things, the dogs, dog kennel. And you guys give an occupational business permit to. And there was no open public hearing at all. The guy just got the business permit. And his dogs are just 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I'm kind of wondering why you can't just did a permit for him and not do open for public comments. And so, I mean, it kind of dropped, it dropped the value of the property because, you know, me and the neighbors are all just complaining about these dogs going 24/7. And then he first started doing some music 24 hours a day, try to calm him down. Somebody must have complained, he shut that off. Now he's got this white noise thing that sounds like a hissing noise, and it actually is permitted, it says vibrations. Well, that hissing noise is vibrating my house 24 hours a day now. So, like, the other morning, it's 3 in the morning, they started. And you hear the noise, so I'm kind of wondering what I can do with these dogs and his noise he's making. When I talk to the Sheriff's Department, they're usually too busy on another call, and they're but I'm just kind of wondering what I can do.
Unfortunately, you're probably coming before the wrong commission. We don't handle that kind of stuff. We don't handle permits. So that would be the planning department. I'm not sure who else would have been involved in that.
I would start with filling out a complaint form with the planning department and we'll take a look at it.
I did that, and they say they're investigating, but they told me to call back in 2 months. Well, that's been over a month and it's still going on.
I can check in with my complaints manager, Katie.
We don't, that never came in front of us. We're dealing with the comprehensive plan and some code amendments and stuff like that, but yeah. We didn't issue a permit, so.
Right, I didn't know what kind of code you had for that particular thing or whatever as far as property goes.
That wouldn't be under the codes that we deal with. We deal with land use.
Right, well, thank you.
No problem. Any other public comment? All right, if not, we'll go to our workshop discussion, which is a review of the implementation component. I think we have some agencies here. We've been struggling with part of the land use policies. One of those policies that we would like to see considered is has to do with approval of pre-approval or before development approval or before approval of some land use decisions. What kind of review Panhandle Health, IDEQ, and or IDWR can offer that we can put into a policy. The thought is, at least the thought of the commission, this commission is, that we would prefer to see review or approval, whatever is appropriate, at the front end rather than the back end. And we're just not sure how that fits in with, your regulatory assignments. So if you could fill us in on that, that would be great. I know we've talked to Catherine quite a bit, and we know that she's in favor of something like that. So we're to the point now where we want to try to draft it into a policy. So whoever wants to go first.
Do you want to just start passing the mic out? So
Sure.
who wants to start?
Can you hear me? Is this,
Yeah, those aren't going to magnify there.
Yeah,
They're for the
okay.
record, so. And also,
Ready?
the clerk told us that these mics have been used all day and they died. So,
Okay.
I don't know. We'll deal with that, I guess.
so, I guess this is Catherine from Panhandle Health District. And I would be happy to start, but I'm kind of curious what you would like us to start with. Is it kind of this highlighted section, or which?
Right, so item number 7 in the proposed.
There it is.
Okay,
What we have so far, and until we realize that we don't have enough information, is all applications for zone change and dwelling unit building location permits should first be reviewed by the applicable state agency, public, Panhandle Health, IDQ, IDWR. And we have prior to application. So I think you can tell from that we're not really sure where the review fits in and whether or not there's any meaningful input that can be had on a zone change as opposed to a building location permit.
sure. Yeah, this is the stuff you were going to, our power went out that day is when I was trying to attend via Zoom. But the option that I could imagine working best for a zone change would be some type of speculative site evaluation, which is pertaining to septic and assessing the property to see whether or not it's suitable for whatever it is they're wanting to do. Usually, I would think if it's a zone change, it's maybe one, I guess, is it usually just one parcel still at that time, or is it usually multiple?
Could be multiple.
So the nice thing about a speculative site evaluation is that it is $550 currently. They would have to schedule the test holes with Panhandle Health District. We would go out and look at the site and verify, if it's one parcel and they're thinking, well, in the future, we want to do a zone change and make it into 10, we would talk about that when we're with them, look around the site and make sure those areas would be conducive to that many parcels or those parcels in that general area that they're thinking about. That would be one way to get the information, because the main thing would be getting the information about septic from us having our boots on the ground, because through the years here, we've gone around and around about this, and from Panhandle Health's perspective, we can't give any information until we know the information we need, which is the site and soil conditions and distances to water, slopes, all the things. So in terms of a zone change, because they just wouldn't know yet which way they're headed, they could do it as a speculative site evaluation. I don't want to muddy the waters, but they could also do it through our other path of applications, which is land development applications, which result in a plat potentially, or the information, or the speculative site evaluation would go towards a permit. But if they're thinking about a zone change to create some future parcels, then they're obviously going towards land development in some cases, but they might not be in all cases. So it kind of depends. But either way, they would need to fill out one of our applications, which we would guide them on that, kind of depending on their project. But from your perspective, I could potentially see requiring some type of Panhandle Health District septic site evaluation. That way, it gives room for them to work with us to figure out which application would make most sense to them. because we would ideally want them to make the most of their money. If they're going towards a land development and a subdivision plat later, then they could use that money to stay on that path. They wouldn't lose that money. If they thought they'd be going towards a septic permit, that they could use that. But we would be able to determine that internally here at PhD. But your language would be some type of septic site evaluation from Panhandle Health District. As far as subsurface disposal zone zone changes that would involve septic.
What do you issue? Assume somebody does that. What do they actually get from Panhandle Health?
In both cases that I'm thinking, the cheapest way to do it, because they'd be so early in the planning process, would be either a speculative site evaluation, which we normally do when someone's moving towards a septic permit usually, but it's really just a site evaluation to get information. So they would get a report after we went out there and did test holes and all of the site stuff to verify whether or not it's suitable for septic, and we would have an understanding of what type of systems, how many systems, what the site conditions are. And if they started to try to go down the land development process, they would do a preliminary soil analysis, which again would result in basically the same thing, which is an informational report. Both of those items would result in an informational assessment. So there are cases where someone could get an informational assessment and it might say that it's not suitable for septic, or it's only suitable for septic in this little part of the land, or whatever it might be. But it would give someone enough information to make more well-informed decisions on where property lines might want to go, or if you could fit that density, especially if we go out there and we see a large portion of it is wetlands or surface water or steep slopes or bedrock or all the things we see in Bonner County.
So what about, so going beyond a zone change, so if you get into a land division, I assume you could do the same thing? And
Yeah,
that become a little bit more specific?
Yep, we always understand that people don't know what they're doing on the front end. We just want to get as much information as possible about the general site. So if someone knew they were going to move towards the platting process with land development, we would probably advise them to do what's called a preliminary soil analysis application, which will result in a report, an informational report. And we could do that across multiple parcels even, and that would just give them an idea of where it makes sense to put lot lines in the future, how to organize all of it. So we would just traipse over all the land associated with the project. And then from there, they'd have a lot more useful information, and so would you guys, and so would the commissioners, to understand the feasibility in general for septic. But of course, we're not specific until someone gets to the point of applying for a septic permit later on down the road. I mean, that's when you get really specific. This would be basic information to say, yes, we see that these areas are suitable for some type of septic system. Whatever that system ends up being in the future depends on how these people develop their land in the end. But
And so then, moving down the road to a building location permit, you would actually, we put in a policy that the county should require approval before a building location permit is issued. Does that make sense?
Yep. That'd be
That would
perfect.
actually be an approval for a siting of the septic system.
Now we'd get the people who own the land to get to the point of planning their project in detail and telling us where they think they want their septic. Ideally, having us out there on the front end is beneficial to them and everyone involved, because they know where is suitable and then what land to protect. It's up to you guys if you would want a full permit issued before you signed a BLP. I know, like, Matt's been around where it used to be, counties do it all different ways, but at least getting us out there to look at it before the BLP is issued to verify their project is feasible makes a lot of sense.
So short of a permit, what would they get from?
A speculative site evaluation.
So the other part of this too, like it says in that language in number 7, the last part, prior to application, meaning a county application for some land use action. It could go that way, or, so therefore, this information would be submitted with the land use application when they do it. Seems logical, but there's some realms where they say, no, go get that, or make your application first so that the agency knows that you're serious. You're not just purely speculating. Which way would that be? Would it be? It's a tough one because,
Well, it really depends. So, when by the time we issue a septic permit, the state requires that we ensure that, for one, the site is suitable for subsurface sewage disposal for a septic system. We also, though, the approval and the septic permit we issued is contingent on meeting all of the setback requirements, soil depths and so forth. So we do need a very detailed site plan, very much like the building location permit, to be able to verify those setbacks. And just when we're discussing septic permitting, we actually have some basic points of septic permitting in Idaho. These are statewide rules. We're contracted through the Department of Environmental Quality to administer those rules. So these are not Panhandle-specific rules for Panhandle Health District. And so we have to meet all of the requirements of the state of Idaho before we can issue a septic permit. And so the site evaluation that Catherine mentions, that determines basic suitability of the property, but really approval for a specific septic system requires review of the entire project. So we've structured our processes to allow for an initial evaluation so that we can determine suitability. In the case of land divisions, lot line adjustments, zone changes, those types of things, one of the really beneficial aspects of going through that process is that there's any portions of that property that's going to be subdivided that would not be suitable for a septic system, that gives the developer an opportunity to create easements, shift property lines, those types of things, because the goal would be, if those are going to be created for the purpose of buildable parcels, that they're actually suitable for building, and that the people don't run into problems later, because along with those statewide rules, it places legal responsibility on the property owners. And there's times where, if we're not careful, we can have property owners that inadvertently, are out of compliance with the state rules and potentially facing misdemeanor charges, even large fines through the state of Idaho, although they have an approved building permit by the county. So that's part of the challenge with this. And in the case of subdivisions, the state requires that we determine base suitability on any lot that's proposed before we can lift sanitary restrictions. And what sanitary restrictions essentially mean is that, no structures can be built on these properties until that property is evaluated. So if we're going through, we subdivide properties without lifting of sanitary restrictions, building permits are issued and approved without knowing if those properties are suitable, there's the potential to, have property owners again inadvertently be in a situation where they're out of compliance with state rules, but in compliance with county ordinances. Does that make sense? It's kind of a lot in there, but okay.
so both ways, as the sentence talks about zone changes or building location permits, having Panhandle look at it to whatever extent prior to the application for either of those sections.
That's really the only way to ensure that properties are buildable, and most counties in Idaho operate that way. Sometimes, just by tweaking through the process, and then honestly sometimes because they haven't operated that way, and the result are these properties that are unbuildable. There's several examples in all of our counties, but Kootenai County is a good example of that, where there's several subdivisions that were approved with sanitary restrictions enforced 30, 40 years ago, and there's lots that are still not buildable out there. That creates a lot of compliance issues for the sheriff's departments, the county planning and building departments, the health district, and so that's just the general, the most common process in the state of Idaho, but it's not required by the state of Idaho that the county follows that process, if that makes sense.
So does this make sense then? All applications for zone change, I guess you should add in there land division, and the dwelling unit, building location permit should first be reviewed by Panhandle Health. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, but again, we want to make sure that we're working within, the systems by the county. That's from our perspective, that's the only way to really ensure that these properties are going to be buildable by the time we get to the point when somebody's building, that we have a septic permit that matches that use, that also meets county code and state of Idaho requirements. Catherine laid out some of the just general processes that we have, and really we're able to, to some, as much as we can, cater our processes to fit, you know, the county requirements, but this is a recommendation in every county that we operate in. And then, you know, depending on what their specific ordinances are, you know, we can tweak things. And so, like, as Catherine mentioned, if the end result of the process is not going to be a plat that somebody's going to sign, we could start with a site evaluation application that gathers the information, determines base suitability, the fees, all of that information can go towards a septic permit. If it's going to result in a plat, then we would go down the land development route, but we have, you know, similar processes that allow for just base evaluation just to determine suitability, and then really allow for, just like Catherine said, for, to help drive development of those projects, future planning, budgeting, and just to help inform decisions, especially for buyers, you know, so that if somebody's looking at a piece of property, they understand what the suitability is. Which we would also recommend even if it was an existing vacant lot that didn't go through the platting process, just so a buyer understands the cost and complexity of the system type. Because one of the things, one of the really nice things about the septic program in Idaho is we have a lot of different technologies at our disposal. We have a very fast on-ramp to integrate new technologies, but with, you know, with increasing complexity comes increasing cost. And so that's just, again, it's something that we always would really prefer that buyers, future property owners understand, you know, what the system requirements are going to be so that they can budget accordingly. We really, you know, emphasize that in realtor trainings, you know, try to get, you know, so that they can pass on that education to the buyers. So.
I have one question.
Sure.
So all it requires is a site evaluation to what have sanitary restriction lift?
Well,
For in the case of, for the septic, it really depends on the nature of the project. So,
Well, like, because we just added the language in there, any land division. So let's say we have Jake's my brother, I want to give him a piece of property. This is going to trigger your review. If we go ahead and put that on either a short plat or MLD or any of those, as site evaluation is all that's required for you to go ahead and do the sanitary restriction lift. Is that correct?
if there's no public water system, municipal sewer system involved.
No, but if you came out and done the site evaluations, let's say for a minor land division or a short plat, that's all that's required at that point in order for you to live.
I mean, basically, that's the gist of it. They would need, if they really wanted, if someone wanted land or sanitary restrictions lifted, they would not do the preliminary evaluation that we just spoke of. They would actually go through the whole land development application so that they could start with the preliminary soil analysis for $500, but then once they decide how many, because we would help them decide how many lots, where the lot lines should go, blah, 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 all the things, and then they would fill out a land development application telling us what they want to do. Do they want individual wells? Do they want shared wells? Is this going to be a plat where there's a municipal water system? And then also the wastewater, if we're out there doing test holes, obviously the wastewater is septic. So then we would just verify, you know, whatever the septic is for all of them. And then they'd have to do whatever's necessary, which is usually not that much if it's just, say, individual wells and septic. And then we would sign the plat at that point. If it was municipal services, we would be working with DEQ and the purveyor, because we would want to verify that not only does the purveyor of the water have the capacity for these additional connections, but whatever engineering review requirements are necessary. And then we'd want to make sure that all of these newly created lots, if there's easements necessary to go between parcels or whatever, that all that's getting squared away. So there could be some extra stuff, but the gist of it, for the actual lifting of sanitary restrictions would be that you'd need a full land application and that information.
So the site evaluation is really an informational tool.
Which does put you in the position of needing to, the planning department, whoever is utilizing this, would in some ways be interpreting our information, or the expectation would be that people are contacting us to ask us what this information means. Because it does get convoluted on some of the complex sites, our report might be confusing. If you wanted a full-on septic permit, say, for one example, I'm not saying this would, but if you wanted a septic permit that, where you knew a site was suitable because a permit's been issued or something for a BLP, that'd be a little bit different. But if you just requested a speculative site evaluation, then that would be what you would get. And then within that evaluation, there's still a potential that it could say that lot is not suitable, right? So then you guys would be in the position of needing to interpret or ask us questions or.
Just wanted to follow up really quick on Commissioner Lynn Scott's question. And so, as an example, Kootenai County has recently allowed these family divisions that do not result in a plat. It's a record of survey. And within their ordinances, they essentially just require that those newly created parcels are determined to be suitable. So because it doesn't result in a plat, we do that through a single site evaluation. We can look at test holes on those lots, apply the fees towards one of the septic permits for that property, and then all that information can be used to permit septic systems in the future. So it really depends on what the county's processes are. Benoit County operates in a similar way.
Yeah, I think that the goal here is just to make sure we have that check and balance.
Yep.
Because currently, those site evals, or those land development evaluations, so I track it.
Does that make, yeah, okay, thanks. I just want to make sure that, just kind of give an example of how we can cater our processes to work well with the county processes. Because we have certain state of Idaho requirements that we have to meet. But then, when we're working with the counties, we can cater those really to help fit your processes as much as possible, all with the goal of just ensuring that future properties are going to be buildable for people.
Thank you. Very helpful. So I guess we need to have some information from IDQ. So obviously, we're dealing with septic. I think now we have to deal with sewer. And we also, what's really been puzzling us is what we can ask for in terms of water, either quantity or quality, mostly probably quantity. But we're kind of stumped on that. So
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. There's obviously several topics in our realm.
Sorry, for those
Anna
for those of us that are new, your name and which.
That's where I'm going, yep.
Okay.
Anna Moody. And I'm the drinking water program supervisor out of the Coeur d'Alene office. So there's a few things. Water quantity is not something that we evaluate in our agency, but we do approve capacity of systems to serve. And for systems that may meet the definition of a public water system or lots that intend to connect to a public drinking water system, they must receive a will serve letter from that system, and we approve that capacity of the system. There's a challenge in that those systems sometimes might give a will serve, and technically they may not have the water. So we do review some of those applications to make comment. But the other side of that is just an individual, if you're doing a minor division and you're looking at individual wells, we don't have great aquifer assessments up here right now. We know of areas that might be challenged to find water, and we're trying to do better in some of our areas to get private well owners to do some more assessment of water quality. But knowing if they have enough water can be challenging. For us, it's giving a phone call. We've thought about this ahead of time. What would be beneficial for us to provide information ahead of application, but things change through the application process. So DEQ does well if we have something in front of us that is written and drafted to know the technical nature of a project. But we always ask that people call us first so we can just talk through it. But we don't have a suitability assessment. We don't have anything in writing we would give a property owner unless we had something from them demonstrating what they're going to do. So that's a challenge.
So really, it sounds like it's more like a building location permit. You might be able to say where a well could be sited?
Well, that would be, it depends on the circumstance. So if it's a private domestic well and it's not meaning to serve other uses like a public system or a business, or connect to a water system that's local, that would be through Department of Water Resources. And there are requirements for permitting for drilling, as you guys are all aware, setback distances from, different sources of contamination. That is why the suitability assessments really work so well for property owners to go through that through Panhandle Health, because you're going to need to know where your septic can go really before you've known where your well goes. And people have done the inverse and had a lot of problems with that because of the complexity of our land up here. But the permitting then through Department of Water Resources might occur, for private owners, but also in our process, if it is a major subdivision or smaller lots that want to connect to, an already existing water system, there may have to be upgrades that are done. And we do have more stringent requirements for public water systems for wells. And then we do approve well site location, well construction. But again, I've been thinking through this the last week, what would be most beneficial. But there's two big things. It's given us a call ahead of time. We don't really have a checklist to do something ahead of application. And implementing sanitary restrictions, until those sources can be found for water and sewer. So we've thought about it, how to do it, and those are the biggest things,
So it's really
Yeah.
kind of more geared toward a public system, either sewer or water.
Well, yes, we do make comments, though. I mean, of course, we sometimes make comments on application if there's going to be impact near surface water, to setback distances and water quality considerations, but there really is going to be geared towards public. Or potentially with increased flows when it's maybe a community sewer system that may require large soil absorption systems. That's where we get involved too. But
Even on the review of will serve letters, that's pretty far down the development.
correct. That's why we ask them to call us first. But again, our agency does best if we have something in writing. So even if we did approve something at the beginning, once we see an application for permit to the county and we see things have changed, that might cause alarm and we'll make other comments. And what if something has to change in their physical systems or design?
How many public water systems are there in Bonner County? A lot.
There's about 420 in the 5 northern counties, and I meant to look at that this morning. How many in Bonner County? I can show you where we can look it up pretty quickly. At least 100. At least 100 maybe.
At what level do you become a public water system? How many connections, so that
Sure.
would help to clarify?
Well, we've
We've
talked about that a lot.
Yeah, we have, yep. And I know that, early on, we tried to help in your early on in comp planning to give you some ideas for definitions, because your definition of a community or public system is different than the state of Idaho's definition, or it was previously. So for Idaho rules for public drinking water systems, a public water system serves 15 connections or regularly serves 25 or more people, 60 or more days per year. And then there are different classifications. So a school could be a water system, a gas station could be a water system, a machine shop could be a water system, not just a subdivision. So we generally will look at subdivisions and review them for engineering standards at 10 connections. Years ago, some of you been around, we did review 2 to 9s, but we no longer do. However, some of those small subdivisions we regulate because there are large families, and there's 25 or more people that live there routinely. So, or you have a combination. So it's 15 connections automatically, regardless of population, or it's 25 or more people, an average of 60 or more days per year.
Okay.
And sewer, go ahead.
One other thing on water systems, so like Anna mentioned, DEQ has responsibility for the public water systems. Any shared systems between 2 and 9 connections, if sanitary restrictions are going to be lifted, we're required to evaluate that to determine that there's water rights for future properties, that the system is designed properly, that there's adequate funding to ensure that there's actually,
that there's actually a water system for future users to connect to. So these are all requirements of Idaho code that don't fall under DEQ jurisdiction, but we would review those if we're asked to lift sanitary restrictions. So in the case where sanitary restrictions are not lifted, just like in the example of the wastewater systems, that creates the possibility for non-public shared water systems to be created, connected to, and used that do not meet Idaho requirements. So just another area that we
I could say one more thing. Also about public systems, it's regardless of configuration. So for example, if someone wanted to divide, do a major subdivision, and say they want a bunch of shared wells, but make an association, that would be the same ownership, and that would be a public drinking water system. It wouldn't be a way to preclude meeting those sanitary requirements. So if you have, let's say you have two 5-lot divisions, and you want to start a subdivision here and start one here, and you build 2 water systems, but they're the same ownership, that's actually a public drinking water system. It wouldn't be able to separate that to make it to 2. So, 153 public water systems in Bonner County. So-
We have the list from when you did the public services component. We had
Yep.
149 then, but it was
Yep.
about a year and a half.
So it is growing, and I think we talked about it when we met. When was that last year that we met? Yeah, it was a while ago. You guys been at this a long time. Good job. It's hard work. But that does change, so I think I maybe made a comment that you at least reference that it's evolving, because we have new public water systems coming in all the time or changing, so it won't be static, but.
I have a question for you. Sure.
Yep.
And I've asked you this question, I think, every year for the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Any priority nitrate areas in Bonner County you're aware of?
Not currently. And I know you've had concerns, and it's helpful that you do, and I know that we've talked to, we've had great hopes to do more evaluation in the Sagal area for water quality characterization. We don't see an increasing trend, but we would like to know use and the expansion that's going on there. So we've been still seeking out private well owners to help do that. So no nitrate priority areas, but yep.
So, Anna, do you know if Water Resources is getting permission to monitor more wells or putting in more inspection wells? I know that was the quest 4 or 5 years ago.
Is there someone here with IDWR? No, I don't see him.
Nobody's here.
No, so, well, I mean, those sort of assessments are legislative obligations, like, comprehensive reviews of, aquifers, and they do have to have that funding allocated and request it. So if there's a request far enough along, that can happen, but they need the staffing and the money, to do that.
The quantity is a concern that we get constantly.
It is a major concern.
Especially with drying conditions.
Yep.
Wells are going dry, not as much, and they're afraid if you punch more wells around mine's gonna go dry.
Yep. And in your county, you have variable conditions. You have some aquifers that recharge from precipitation and they might dry up. You have some that are in the bedrock that just get like a gallon a minute and you don't really know what the extent is. Water quality concerns in some areas.
But
So-
quantity is one of the
Yeah.
bugaboos that we're trying to get a hold of.
And that's a challenge, so even as, Jason's talking about, they still have to consider for future, but it's really just sort of our professional knowledge and understanding of what we see. Yeah, so we don't have a map for you or a list. You could give us a call and we'd say, well, approximately that area, we know they have this. So that's why it's site-specific or application-specific. It's really tough. Yeah, so.
So there really isn't anything that we can put in here that we could suggest should be required on an application for a zone change or a land division. It's really not until you get down to, the building location permit that you would become involved.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we do see requests, with zone change, and sometimes we do or don't make comment, or we'll send a standard comment. Just because we send a standard doesn't mean we don't have comments, but we don't have, we can't review everything thoroughly, but we try to do a good job. But that's why we say if they could call us, if there's any question, that is the best option. But yeah, I can't see anything for DEQ doing for water quantity, water quality, sewerage, ahead of having actual application in front of us.
For
It's
building
tough.
permit.
Yeah, for a building permit or
And
other land use changes, yeah.
And that would, from DEQ, that would be primarily a review of a will-serve letter, correct?
We do review the will serve letters. We do also evaluate when Panhandle Health District, was looking at their site assessments and for sanitary restrictions.
Yeah, that would be one thing I just want to make sure everyone leaves this meeting understanding that the land development process is a statewide process. It was established with an MOU and a land SOP between all of the 7 health districts and Idaho DEQ. So we do have the authority the health districts in Idaho are the ones who have authority to lift sanitary restrictions. And so when people come to us, we are then in the background also communicating with DEQ if there's things that come up. So ultimately, if you're looking for something pertaining to the land development, the main thing I would recommend is that they work with Panhandle Health, because when they submit their application to us for a land development, it has all of the it's like, what's the water system? What's the septic system? Is it DEQ? Is it state, city, municipal? What is it? So we would capture that at that point in time. Unlike some of the things that have occurred in recent years where we have some municipal systems that are in areas where land was split with sanitary restrictions in force and more lots were created than what basically a DEQ system could accommodate. We were never issuing tank-only permits or anything for those systems, so we had no idea that the land had been, meaning Panhandle Health, we had no idea that the land had been split, and we had no idea that there was new connections being made to this municipal system, because the only way we would have been brought in to the equation is if they had come to us for that land development application. Because if it's any type of municipal system that's not discharging subsurface, like a lot of our sewer districts, Granite Reader or some of these others, Panhandle Health doesn't issue tank-only permits, so we would have no way to know what's happening with any of those systems. So we bridge the gap when it comes to municipal systems and land development by basically the person has to come to us and then they tell us what municipal systems they're wanting to use. We verify with DEQ and they communicate back to us. And this process is established with the statewide SOP and an MOU that we have, the health districts have with DEQ. So anything that's planning on resulting in new lots that someone intends to build on, which means they need to have sanitary restrictions lifted, the best bet is for them to come to Panhandle Health and apply for that sanitary lift so we can verify their water and sewer. And like I said, we would be working with DEQ basically as we're bridging that gap, if that makes sense.
So you're kind of quarterbacking this
Yeah.
operation?
Yeah.
So if we just eliminated DEQ and DWR from this policy, would that make sense?
It's a little bit tricky because we're talking about a few different things. If you're talking about the zone changing and something pertaining to land development, new lots, that does make sense to me, I think, sort of.
Yeah, but you're
But then-
also major.
That's the other thing.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
There's some things in there that,
All types of land.
yeah, all kinds of.
If it had to, we're all dealing with the sanitary services, which is water and sewer. So maybe there's a way to word it, that's an or some type of, because it is so site-specific and project-specific.
Sounds like the Department of Water Resources are not really part of this equation.
Well, yeah.
Really only, in terms of lifting of sanitary restrictions, for the projects that we review, Idaho code requires, basic requirements. For example, we have to, the water source for the subdivision needs to be listed on the plat. In the case of the shared wells, it requires water rights for those applications. And we've developed a process with the regional IDWR office where they'll provide specific guidance information based on the nature of that development when we have the opportunity to review, and lift sanitary restrictions so that they can get so that they can, start working with that developer to ensure that future property owners are going to have water rights, because that's getting to be a bigger deal within Idaho. Other than that, I really don't know IDWR's involvement.
That and the permitting of drilling is the other
So they
piece.
permit the drilling, and then eventually they would give a water right if they found water.
If they apply for a water.
If it's a private lot, they have the option to not apply for the water right, which does not reserve their place and time, but that's at their own risk. So that's
So
allowable,
the only thing that'd be actually required would be a drilling permit.
correct.
Sure. I got an email at 5:01 today, right as we got started, or after we got started. And this is a comment from IDWR. More or less, they just want to encourage developments and subdivisions to do community wells for domestic purposes.
Because that way, there are less holes punched into an aquifer. That means reduced sources of contamination. When we get into the private versus public wells, shared wells, community wells, I see a lot of plats that have happened with, we're going to drill private wells on each lot. And then they drill shared wells with 4 to 8 homes sharing a well, but they're all owned by the association that governs the home, so they've created a public water system without ever having contacted DEQ. So I would encourage leaving DEQ as a contact in there, leaving IDWR as a contact. We can always say, yep, we don't need to see your project. But trying to fix something on the back end because they've created a public water system without any oversight is really difficult and expensive and a lot of heartache.
Well, you mind stating your name so we have it on the
This is
record?
Katie Baker-Castile. I'm the
Hi,
engineering
thanks.
manager at
And
the
Jason,
Department of
we-
Environmental
I
Quality.
think you state your
He
name.
did, yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
about that. Jason Pepin, tenant of the district.
Yeah. All right, any questions? So what we're really struggling with is we've had a lot of comments during this whole comprehensive plan process about water, and the availability of water, and what are you doing about making sure there's adequate water? And, we put some things in the land use component that talked about that, but we're trying to be a little more specific here because we don't know whether that's actually workable. So that's kind of what we're struggling with, and I'm kind of hearing that really isn't any way to really determine that.
Unless somebody intends to connect to a.
Unless it's a
Yeah,
public water
but-
system.
Yeah.
But the others, and even that was just brought up, doing it kind of piecemeal and then it becomes de facto, well, in actuality, it's a public system. But still, it's not hooked up to a system that a city has or a water district or a sewer district has. So it's very complex across the board.
Were these rules,
What
were these
are
rules,
the mechanics of how that happens? Are people coming in for a BLP on the individual lots and saying, I'm gonna connect to this well over here that my neighbor already drilled? And then 3 or 4 homes do that, and is that how the mechanics of how that happens?
They-
Or- I'm not sure I understand.
A lot of them were created as minor land division. They were land splits where Panhandle Health wasn't involved, or even in some cases we were involved. And they informed us, or we might have gone through the process, or they said to the county, we're going to do all these lots with individual wells. But then we're not out there, we don't go out there and follow up to verify that's what they end up doing. So then if they decide, without us knowing it, to just drill one well and share it, we wouldn't really.
I'm trying to understand where the hole is in the process. At BLP time, do we require people to identify their water source, assuming they're building a single-family residence?
They need to state what their, yes, they need to tell us what their water is.
They're either gonna
Private
drill a well
well,
or they're gonna connect to
shared
something else.
well,
So it seems like that and referring back to whatever they maybe told us at lot creation time to see if they're the same thing or not, or did somebody change the story along the way? I'm just trying to understand again,
yeah.
where's the hole in the
Yeah,
process?
well, and that's exactly
There's
what it is.
situations,
It's
I can think of people out in our neighborhood who, yep, we're gonna drill a well, then they find out what it's gonna cost. And the guy over there, 75 feet away or something's got a well, and it's producing 60 gallons a minute. Why? It's a pipe. You know?
Yeah.
So it happens, but they're not required to come back and tell the county or Panhandle or anybody, they just do it.
It seems like there's some more due diligence that's required at that time.
Yeah,
Say,
but
okay, how many people are already connected to this well?
Oh, true.
And is this now becoming, I assume there's a process if it does evolve over to, say, you have a shared well in a couple homes and, you know, 6 other people come along and say, hey, you got plenty of water, can we connect to your well? Do you have a process for saying, okay, going back and saying, all right, this was created as a private well, but now there's enough demand, we can turn it into a public system by making whatever changes need to be made?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So that would be, give us a call. Let's have a meeting and talk about how many homes you're planning to serve. You know, at the end of the day, what are you going to be serving? Is it just these 8 homes? Or is it, we're going to do these 8 lots now, and 5 years when we've recouped our costs, we're going to add this next 8. Well, now we've got 16, and that's a public water system, and it should have been planned from day one as a public water system. So that's a phone call, a conversation to have.
Well, to me, it
Early.
starts with a flag somewhere that
Yes,
says,
and maybe it's
that phone call needs to happen. Right?
and maybe it's, I don't know, I'm back of the napkin here, but between the building permit and the occupancy permit, does anybody check that they did what they said they did?
We don't do
They don't do
occupancy.
Okay. So-
Building department.
You said, if I can ask.
Property rights, man.
Sure, go ahead.
My name is Jack Howard, and I'm associated with Southside. I'm partially here for Southside and partially as a citizen. The interesting thing about this discussion to me is why there's an or for the applicable water and sewer district in section 7. Because property owners know if they're in the district, and the district knows if there's going to be capacity to serve sewer or water. And to me, we sort of preempt the whole discussion that's been going on with Panhandle. You guys wouldn't come in and say, hey, you can't, Southside can't cut these people off. We own the capacity of the system. So to me, that needs to be recognized. I think that works pretty well. Today, people come in and ask us, we're looking at a pretty big subdivision that somebody's talking about up above Lakeshore, and we don't, right now, we're not gonna have the capacity to serve them until there's an expansion of our storage lagoon. So to me, that is an important thing that to me is curious that it's.
So you'd suggest what?
Or applicable water and sewer district after comma IWR.
We would still, if they wanted to lift sanitary restrictions, even if it was fine with you, we would still be the ones who,
Well, we wouldn't approve that, because it's in our bylaws that septic isn't approved. You can have a well, and we went through that with the little slots, they.
no, I'm just talking about if they wanted to lift sanitary restrictions utilizing Southside Sewer,
Oh,
it would still come through us because we would be telling them that they have to get a will served from you.
yeah, that's all we want.
Yeah,
That's-
and that's our role. That's why we do
Yeah.
end up being kind of the hub
The
of this
clearinghouse, yeah.
process.
The kind of
Right.
Because
clearinghouse
each
for-
county is different.
Well, I think that's where Alan was going with, do we need to say IDQ and IDWR?
Yeah, because
There's some scenarios I would
A
say.
little
you
bit
have
of
to-
other stuff,
you-
yeah.
You can't ignore it at a policy level. You have to say that and let them wade through what, let them wade through it.
And that brings up thank you for that point, because one other aspect of this, we're obligated by Department of Environmental Quality on subdivision applications, if there's a central or municipal sewer district within 2,000 feet of the boundaries of that proposed project, to reach out to the sewer district and see if there's a capacity and willingness to serve, or 1,000 feet for individual systems. So that's just something that we.
My vision for Bonner County as a citizen is that we think wastewater management first and not septic first.
Yeah, exactly, for that reason, yeah. And so we work in conjunction with the sewer districts, and in the situation, we have many of these around the 5 counties at this point, when a sewer district no longer has capacity to serve, or they, it's for whatever reason they can't serve, then we can proceed with septic systems. We always give preference, because we 100% agree with that sentiment, so we always give preference to that sewer district, but in situations where they either can't serve them or it's not reasonably accessible, we have situations in Shoshone County, for example, where it's 700 feet away up and over ridges, and it's just not in the sewer district's best interest to be maintaining, sewer mains in certain areas. So we always start the conversation there, but we're ideally doing that up front so that we have this figured out, before there's homes built on these parcels.
So if you're in a sewer district, you have a lot that you want to build on, don't you have to connect to the sewer district if you're within the district?
If we issue a will serve, because we're accountable for how many connections exist on that in the system. So for example, Southside's at 500, we've got a capacity of 533.5, right? So we're looking right down the end of the barrel of capacity as it exists now, but we have clear plans to be able to expand in the future. So if somebody comes in with 40 connections, that those with impact fees or other fees, we're going to be able to expand the system and eventually go out to the full capacity of the system or of the district. So you want to encourage people to go towards sewer handling wastewater, and along with the fees that drive that, right? So if you come in, they understand that they're going to have to pay to upgrade the infrastructure. Growth pays for growth is kind of our philosophy.
I was always under the impression that if you were within the district, that you had to connect.
You do, and actually why I'm on the board is I own my property since 1981. In 2009, I decided to build and I couldn't connect to Southside because there was a moratorium in effect. So I had to wait, and I was the first guy to connect after they raised the lagoon back in 2010.
So did you build a septic system instead?
No, I can't. Right, so I've been paying.
That's why
I've been paying waterfront taxes, and I can't connect. So I was a little agitated, but that's the way the system works, and that's the way it should work.
Yeah, I was kind of responding to kind of the suggestion that if you're at capacity, then you could put a sewer system, a septic system in. I didn't think you could.
No, you want more people to put that demand to cause the expansion. Because certainly the guy that's building 40 or 50 a lot complex, he can substantially underwrite the infrastructure costs that we need.
So this commission has been tasked with looking at the MLD and cert plats and stuff like that. So I mean, it's probably a lot of this conversation is probably more geared towards that.
Yes.
Than the comp plan at this point.
So the last thing I have to say, just the last thing, is that we're on a first come, first serve. So Bahia del Sol, you guys have been hearing about that one. They have about 28 connections, but I don't know if there's going to be, the last 5 lots may be, sorry, we hit capacity, we hit our mark. So it's first comes, first serve. And that is an important aspect when you think about an MLB. Is the guy doing it as an investment and wants to do it long-term? Or is he going to take capacity and start contributing to the system immediately? And that's why we do first come, first serve. Right? We need people to pay into the system.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Jack.
Sure.
During that moratorium, remember there was a couple, this is back when Gary was chairman. There was a couple lots back in Comeback Bay where even though the moratorium, was that you? But they were actually able to go ahead and get to PERC and actually put septic tanks in there with a caveat when that sewer system came back on, they're going to have to go ahead and.
I spent $20,000 on engineering for a septic field, but I didn't want to build it. So I had it engineered where my garden is. Would have been my drain field, but I didn't do it because I wanted to.
When we bought our lot, we bought it from the guy that owns Connie's. And they put the septic system in right when the moratorium was lifted. We had to pay to tear it out and connect to the sewer.
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit, because there are every sewer district's different. We do have a couple sewer districts who they just aren't in the position right now to expand, and they will give us will not serve letters. And they, so they're a little different than you because they're okay with the septic system going in if it meets the standards, which of course it has to for us to issue one. So that's just a different scenario. But the other thing I wanted to bring up pertains to non-municipal shared systems that are private shared systems in communities that are all over Bonner County. We've got a lot of old central systems that are shared systems less than 2,500 gallons per day, but we've also got a ton of old LSASs that are more than 2,500 gallons per day. And there are a lot of them that are, almost every system we have that's shared and discharging subsurface right now in this county is either at capacity, over capacity, or almost there. So it's concerning when new lots are created in areas that are utilizing these shared systems, and now new connections were made without anyone involved assessing that. And it's also troublesome if BLPs get issued in those areas where now there's new dwellings or new bedrooms, because the impacts of that are tremendous, given that these old LSAS systems, most of them are right along waterways, and they're not meeting current standards, and there's not a place to meet current standards for when the system fails. So the more that they, if they start adding flows beyond the design flows of the system, now you're running into the chance of failure, where now that entire community is going to be out of service for however long it takes. And working with these guys on trying to get a new system designed and permitted, and hopefully this isn't all happening in February kind of thing. I mean, it can just be a real mess. So I expect personally, all these old LSASs are going to be failing in the next however many years. That's going to be coming up in our future in Bonner County. So I think it's really important. We try to communicate this with the HOAs. These are privately owned, so these are just the owners, whoever happens to be the HOA president or whatever. And a lot of times they're just not familiar with what's going on. And so it's important, I feel, that as the agencies involved here, we're trying to help protect these communities and make sure that there's a process in place to prevent these systems from being overloaded inadvertently, because it's a challenge, and it will be a challenge.
But that should be caught at the BLP stage, I would think.
But even for land development, you would want to know if someone's going to start splitting and making if there's a subdivision served by a central system that was already designed for those flows only, then there shouldn't be any more lots created, because that system can't accommodate any more lots.
So, but what we've got here, if we saying all applications for a zone change, land division, dwelling unit, building location permit be reviewed by Panhandle Health, you would catch that.
Yeah, and just thinking through this, one thing that might help with this, part of what's complicating it is there's several different types of examples in there: BOPs, zone changes, subdivisions. If we could separate those, a basic recommendation, for example, could be if for land divisions require sanitary restrictions. That's essentially our role, is we assure that the wastewater and the water systems are approved for that use by Department of Environmental Quality. There's engineering review that goes along with that. There's will serve letters that states willingness and capacity to serve. So we handle all of those and ensure that those base requirements are met before we lift sanitary restrictions. In the case of BLPs, building location permits, it could be as simple as requiring approval essentially, or a septic permit if that's how you'd like to operate. In the case of zone changes, lot line adjustments, it could just be determining just suitability, if using the Cooney County example, where there's no plat involved with that, but that's essentially how their code reads. And the same with Bennewauk County, just to ensure that, and Shoshone as well, just to ensure that when they go through these processes, that there's, we've established suitability. So that might be one way that we could kind of organize this and then capture all of them.
How would you word the land divisions?
So for land divisions, it could be as simple as the land divisions require lifting of sanitary restrictions. And so then that, Idaho State Code lays out what the requirements would be depending on the nature of that project. With the exception, some of the counties have certain exceptions where they don't lift sanitary restrictions. So for example, Benoit County has recently adopted a recreation subdivision ordinance for properties along the St. Joe River. And then within that, they work with that developer to make sure that whether it's contracting with a septic hauler, for example, to pump out those tanks, maybe working towards an RV dump station. We're working with Shoshone County to develop something similar so that they could keep sanitary restrictions in force, but still allow people to subdivide land for other purposes. And then, that would also help with situations where people want to add water connections to an existing system, because one thing that Anna mentioned that's really important is that going from a private or a shared non-public water system to a public water system is a really big step up in complexity, and we're dealing with a really frustrating situation in Shoshone County where we're not able to lift sanitary restrictions for exactly that reason. It was this small community that just started sharing water. There's now more than 15 connections, 25 users to the system, and there's really no ability within that small community to bring that up to public water system standards. And now some of these property owners are stuck because they're trying to subdivide, property to be able to split off property for their kids and so forth. So it just really helps kind of prevent those types of situations because it's all rolled in the sanitary restriction process.
Jason, did I hear you correctly that you're suggesting that any land division requires a sanitary restriction lift?
If it's for the purpose of building. Again, that's really depends on what the county's definition of a subdivision is, right? So it really depends on the nature of that, and so that's why I wanted to make sure I use that example in those other counties where they do have exemptions to that, because that's not always the intent. And so there's other processes, but within that, depending on the proposed use and the recreation subdivision example, there's still, a basic evaluation of working with the developer to make sure that the wastewater is handled properly.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, the family split where, like I said, I want to give my brother Jake.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a family split, which is considered a land division, but it's not a plat.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. So like the Cooney County example is perfect for that, because they've, and I can't remember if it's 2 lots, I think it's 4 lots. They go up to 4 lots within this family split, and within their code, it's a really simple statement that those lots need to be evaluated for septic suitability by Panhandle Health District. So again, we use our existing septic permitting processes to try to minimize costs. We can do that all within the umbrella of a cost of a single septic permit. And then when the other properties go to develop, we've already got that site evaluation out of the way. So then they just need to convert that information and those fees towards their septic permit for their project. So that's just how we work there. And then there's similar processes within Benoit County for their own, whether they call them free splits or, something that doesn't necessarily trigger a plat, but still ultimately involves, division of land, all to just, try to ensure that these lots are actually going to be buildable for people in the future.
Yeah, because I'm thinking back through the years, and I'm sure you've been on many of these. I think I've been on the test with you many times down Bottle Bay Cutoff Road, Emerald Acres. A lot of those were originally created just what we refer to as recreational lots.
Yeah,
They weren't meant for, structures. They were just meant for camping, dry camping. And so some of these, there still may be some of these people out here who want to go ahead and land divide up specifically for those recreational lots. So I think we got to be careful, because if we're going to mandate a sanitary restriction lift, even though the intent is to never ever be able to build on it, just dry camping, how do we reconcile that? I mean, I understand it's probably going to have to be the county.
If the requirement is to essentially go to Panhandle and check it out. If you could say that as simply as that, I don't know. That'd be nice, because then you're going to say, you're all right. If it's just dry camping or whatever, no, there's no.
Yes.
Here.
So for an example, with Benoit County, that they've developed this completely separate subdivision classification for recreation subdivisions with their own requirements. Going back to 2007, we developed something similar with Shoshone County. It was kind of tied to their floodplain ordinance, so that's changing, but we're working through that currently with them. to try to develop some process for exactly that, for recreation lots, for land divisions that aren't the conventional, for residential construction, just because that fits well within the uses of the county areas like the North Fork of the Coeur d'Alene, St. Joe Rivers, so there's no sanitary restrictions that's required. And sanitary restrictions are essentially left in place, but that works for those situations because there's no building that's going to occur on those properties. Or
It
residential.
would be really helpful to me. Right now, we're dealing with a really 30,000-foot level. We want to just say something in here that, needs to have some kind of review before these various things happen. But we are, starting, I think, next week, we're going to get into the codes that apply to the various land divisions. And it would be really helpful to me if we could have examples that you think are good from Benoit or wherever, all these other counties that you're mentioning.
Okay.
So we can take a look at those.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'd love to be part of that process, any way that we can help, figure out what works well for Bonner County, how we can, tweak the processes to
And
fit.
we've been assigned that by the county commissioners,
Okay.
so now we got to look at it.
Absolutely, yes, I can start working on that tomorrow, so.
So on this, I'd just like to get, a policy statement in here that, we can all live with. But can it be as simple as referring primarily to PhD and LL?
I think there's enough that would still need to, because it's a comp plan, right? So it's overarching, and then you're gonna drill down into your ordinances or resolutions or overlays or wherever you go. It probably should stay fairly general, and include applicable agencies.
Yeah, what if someone wants to do a concentrated animal feed operation? Then you need to bring in ISDA. Why not just not list individual agencies simply? Because there's four of them, at least, I can think of, that I've had to deal with.
That's okay.
Well, we're trying to give direction to people.
But, and not do a instruction manual. That's the
Right.
other
That's
part,
where your
right?
ordinances come in.
That's where the ordinances come in.
So
right?
that's why at the comp plan, you at least want it in here, but it doesn't need to be so specific, right?
Right, that's our total
Within
rule.
your zone, yeah.
Well, the agencies, yeah, but not omit them. Don't omit that, because
So even
it
if-
limits.
Response to that last one, there are maybe other agencies, but just, you could even say in your state agencies such as, or something like that, just
Yeah.
because it's not an inclusive, all-inclusive list.
Right.
But who makes the call? Who then, when you're talking with an applicant, or they come into and I want to do a capo, okay, where do you go? Well, the staff's going to have to know, you need to go there, you need to go there.
Well, think of the routing already. I mean, should be reviewed.
Should be reviewed by the applicable agency, and think of already review processes that we do. So there are a number of organizations that are already routed to. I can think of 50 different incidences where the specificity is going to be a different agency or a group of agencies or other, and things can get missed, and we've seen million-dollar mistakes. We've seen a lot of it, and it's unfortunate, multi-million-dollar mistakes.
All right, so if we
So
said,
it's-
if we just
yeah.
said applicable state agency, we didn't say who. Not sure that would get by county commissioners, but.
No, well,
I
you
don't
could,
think so.
But then we have in here at the end, prior to application. Does that make sense, or should it be, all applications should be reviewed?
all applications should be reviewed.
Well, county land use application, I'd like to stick that in there, because the application book for homes is prior to applying for a county permit, or prior to county permit application, or something like that.
Yeah.
Just to really specify that's the
Yeah,
application.
because county land use, and then when you got into the zone change process, that's where, like Jason was saying, that could be, within that, you'd be saying a PhD evaluation report or whatever. Then within the land division, within your land division processes, some of them you might not lift sanitary restrictions and others you would, which you already do that now, I guess, but, and then the BLP would be slightly different because that's about the permit, and that's not about lifting sanitary restrictions, so that's where you'd put the septic permit. But again, it'd be in those processes for those, so I could see.
One other point I'd like to make is that whenever possible, we like to be able to work through our processes in conjunction with the county processes, just to streamline everything. And so that would be one concern that we may have if they're required to go through all of this before they even apply with the county. It works really well in counties where we're working through the septic permitting process at the same time they're getting ready to submit for their building permit or their BLP, so that by the time we get to certificate of occupancy, everything's done, it's wrapped up, and then they can move on. Or in the subdivision example, they're working through all the other, survey and everything else that needs to happen, so that at the end of that process, we're both working in those in conjunction, and then we're not waiting for the other agencies to necessarily go through all of their review. So it just, in general, that would just be one other element to this. I'm not exactly sure how we would word it in there, but ideally we're already pretty deep into our process, or at least started on our process when they're also applying at the county level, so that to allow us both to be working at the same time instead of waiting for a BLP application or a subdivision that's been created, and then that's the starting point.
Jake, do I remember correctly? I thought you had a good reason why you wanted these analyses done ahead of the application time.
There's rationale for either direction, right? So you can have a concurrent review. That's a pretty typical standard. The problem, I guess, would come if what happens, well, if you roll back to prior to 2018, I think is when they switched to having no PhD part of review of the building location permit. Essentially, the county would get phone calls after phone calls, and it would be, oh, we're just waiting on PhD's final on this. So it would be a lot of angry calls for us, demanding us to be, and I wasn't here at the time, so demanding the department issue this permit, and we're pending an outside agency. So to simplify our review process, if they came in at the beginning of the BLP with, here's my issued permit for PhD as part of the application contents.
Or in this case, it'd be like, here's my preliminary site eval, or
Exactly.
whatever the case might be.
So, like I said, there's pros and cons to both sides of that. Concurrent review is a pretty typical standard, but yeah.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that once that is part of the code, part of the process, people are aware of that early on, then they'll know to seek out the septic permit, start working on that. That's the way this typically works in other counties, where by the time we receive a building permit application request, we're already working on that project. We're aware of what the requirements are going to be. A lot of times it's just tightening up your site plan to get it to match the septic permit, for example. And so typically in those counties, the way we do it is that we'll require that either a septic permit's issued prior to the building permit being approved, and then the system installation approved prior to certificate of occupancy. I don't know exactly what it's termed in Bonner County, but that just allows for the basic review to happen, the design of the entire project, because the septic system is a utility for that project. It's really not separate, right? So it's all part of that construction project, but then allows for installation of that system at the same time as home construction, which again can really help reduce costs, especially as they're out doing other excavation, if kind of time it properly. So that works really well. But again, I think part of that is because the public is aware of that requirement up front, rather than when they first submit their building location permit application, for example. It's challenging, though, to try to capture that in this, especially in the comprehensive plan, but.
That sure is.
So do you know, Jason, how many counties do a concurrent review versus requiring it prior to application with the county?
I'm familiar with the 5 northern counties, but I can get that information from all the counties.
I was just curious.
And that might be helpful because, so there's 7 health districts in Idaho. We're all working under the same rules, the same guidance from DEQ. So we're very well connected. I'll actually be in Boise meeting with my counterparts next week, and I'll add that as a discussion item and try to get that data to help focus this, because, that's always a question. But
And along with from them, some good suggestions. We'll go look at,
yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Who's this county, that county, whatever. somebody's got to have this figured out somewhere, I hope.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful, like even in the example of the short-term rentals, right? We were able to look around the state.
Right.
There's some, like Valley County, for example, really, their process wouldn't fit within Bonner counties, but we can, glean some information from that, and especially things that work, don't work, and some of the pitfalls to it. And so that's something I can definitely work on, as well as just getting the feel for, which counties require the concurrent reviews, or kind of how they work through that. Within our counties, Kootenai County requires a septic permit to be issued before a building permit's issued. Benewah County as well, and Shoshone County. And actually, all three of those also require installation approval of the septic system prior to certificate of occupancy. Bonner County, Catherine's probably more familiar with that. Boundary.
Well, Boundary doesn't, they do a kind of a, they request input from Panhandle Health in a casual way, I guess. It's an email exchange for the most part, just verifying suitability, but it is.
At what
So-
point in time, though?
Before they issue what they do is placement permits, and so they do that before they issue it. But I'm not totally sure if they would like hold them up or not. Kind of like here, we will comment before in Bonner County as best we can, but I'm not sure that they get held up necessarily. But that is part of the problem, because then if they move forth and the home is built, or what's been occurring in recent years where there's Bonner counties noticing all the already existing structures that are now violations with the county, and then those folks need us to grant approval. And I just looked at some today that I've had several of them, there's several that just don't have final approval. We just can't grant final approval because working the problems backwards is so challenging for some of these folks. Now they've already got the structure. I have someone with 3 different structures on his property that I'm not sure what's going to happen, because he's got to make the move. The only way to get our approval is to put in compliant septic systems. So that's the problem with not having it on the front end, especially when you're speaking about buildable structures that will be generating wastewater. So anytime you've got generating wastewater within our community, ideally we would want it, discharged properly. And I just want to throw this out there too, that our numbers, Jason's got some information here, but our numbers in Bonner County for septic, we're now exceeding Kootenai County. So we are growing in terms of discharges that'll be happening with septic permits. And the challenges of this county, when so much of it is surface water and groundwater and wells and bedrock and steep slopes, the good sites are increasingly going away, or the easy ones. So we just all need to kind of keep that in mind, that that's an added value of having us out there on the front end, is to prevent some of these more challenging sites from getting developed in a wonky way.
Has the rules review, has that gone, where are we sitting with that?
That's a good question. I looked that up yesterday. There was a legislative kind of overview. It seems to have been, there's a bill that basically approving all of the pending DEQ rules. I need to verify that. That's one of our agenda items next week, just to find out specifically. So I believe so, which they would go into effect on July 1st.
Okay.
Yep. And then just to follow up on what Catherine mentioned, and Jake as well. There's been a large shift in septic permit volume within the counties. And so for one, we've, just as Catherine mentioned, Bonner County is really increasing just in terms of the percentage of septic permits that's issued. Back in 2017-18, we were below about a third of the septic permits that we would issue in Bonner County. Since that time, it's climbed up to 50%, and we've increased our staffing level correspondingly to match that. That was really part of what was happening at that time, is that we just experienced this really big influx in Bonner County. And so we've shifted some positions around to make sure that we're staffed suitably to keep up with the workload. And then what we've experienced in other counties, so from my own personal experience, I started at Panhandle Health District in 2004. I worked with Benewah and Shoshone County, from about 2006 to really still do. But, back when I was primarily working in Shoshone County, most of the septic systems that we issued were standard systems, straightforward systems. And over time, as Catherine mentions, those properties, the easier properties are gone. And so now we're to a point where, close to half of the septic permits that we issue are complex alternative systems with very high costs associated with that. And again, that's why we really try to educate realtors as much as we can. But that's just been our experience in other counties is, as the numbers shift, going back to that time, Shoshone County was very active in the septic program. Now the numbers are lower, but the sites are much more complex, and the permits and the systems that are required are as well. So just for what that's worth, that's just something that, observed over the last several decades.
Let me try something here. So we said something like all applications for a land use approval or permit should be reviewed by the applicable state agency. Should be reviewed and approved. Reviewed and evaluated and/or approved by the applicable state agency.
Yeah, and to just thinking through how other counties do this, I'd have to go and look if they list all of the specific agencies, but typically that's handled through a request for comment. So whether it's a conditional use permit, subdivision, any type of county process, they'll send out this request for comment. And many of the agencies may not have jurisdiction, and the comment is simply, not in jurisdiction or no comment, but that way, you'd be able to capture, those agencies. So that's just one way it's done in other counties is through that request for comment process.
Does that work, Jake? Did you get it?
Can you repeat that one more time?
I'm not sure I can. All applications for a land use approval or permit must be reviewed by the applicable, reviewed and approved, reviewed, evaluated or approved by the applicable state agency.
Yeah, reviewed, evaluated, or approved. Yeah.
So, but that still doesn't say prior to making the application.
No, it doesn't say. I took that out.
Okay. Because this is a comp plan. Ultimately, this thought is going to go into code.
Right.
And that's where it's going to get specific. But I can just hear, even whether it's next week's meeting with the commissioners or a subsequent meeting, they're going to want specificity in here. That seems to be the way they go. We gotta do what we can to shape that.
They could revise it.
I know.
I don't see how you get more specific without becoming code.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's why I was saying the ordinances and code is where the specificity
Yeah,
comes.
Exactly.
So
That's
Comp
exactly
plan is
right.
to guide it. If it's not
Can I-
your comp
can I
plan,
quote
you
you?
can't do it.
Can I quote you on that?
Local Land Use Planning Act, let's just go look at that.
So I've been sitting here thinking about this thought, and I've been somewhat reluctant to express it, obviously, because I haven't yet, but maybe I should.
Go ahead.
Would it be useful to be clear about what our objective is? So for example, at land division time, are we trying to minimize the probability of creating lots that can't be served, either by an individual septic system, or if they're in a sewer district, by a sewer district, make sure they have capacity? So for example, if somebody came along and they wanted to do a big land division in Southside, and they wanted to create 60 lots, should we say no? Because we know the Southside only has, I think you said 33 spots left right now. So we would say, no, you can't do that because you're creating lots and we don't know how they would be served.
Half lots.
Well, on the other hand, if it was in a sewer district that was permissive about individual septic systems, in the case when the sewer system was over capacity, would we then turn to Panhandle Health and say, okay, so go do your site evaluation for these lots, because we know the septic system, the sewer system is over capacity, so they're not gonna be able to serve all these lots, but maybe they could have individual lots. So these are the kind of processes that I would put in place if that was my objective, to minimize the probability, I'm not gonna say eliminate, but minimize the probability that we allow a lot to be created where we don't have a foreseeable way to deal with septic on that lot. I don't know if that's the right objective or not. There could be other objectives.
We could actually.
But if we expressed the objective, it would inform the general statement
Which should be written.
when it comes time to write the code. Does that make sense?
It should be written, that objective needs to be written in the component. I mean, as far as the discussion
We
of
could
it.
have it in,
Well, it's
we have
easy.
goals and
It's-
objectives.
Well, true, but it has to be founded in the
It
component's
is.
language.
It is.
Well, to that extent, I don't know. I don't
Well,
think so.
I mean-
The other part of this is, that's certainly one part. The other part is so that the applicants, potential applicants come in and they're not snowballed with, now what are they gonna, now it's this, now, because that's been part of the complaint too. Why didn't you tell me that up front? Okay, that's what we're trying to do. So that they know going in, heads up, you're gonna have this, 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 and this. The other thing may come up, but for the most part, there it is, go talk with those people. So like Catherine's saying, come talk with us.
And just because a lot already exists, and maybe previously they thought they were promised an option, doesn't mean it still happened.
Well, that's why you're saying minimized.
The one thing, just to expand on what you're saying, because I completely agree, if they came back and we said no, we had this happen, somebody said, well, we want to put in 40 connections, well, we're trying to buy 15 acres next to our applied lagoon, so throw us some money so that we can buy it, and then you're going to have the capacity, because we can upgrade, and then we're going to say yes, right?
So to me, the way that process needs to work is you and this applicant
Yeah.
need to have some offline discussions.
Yeah, we do.
And come to an agreement, and then the applicant comes back to us and
Then
says,
come to the county and
now,
say, okay.
they have a plan to expand
Yep.
based on a contribution I'm going to make,
Yep.
and now they're willing to give me a will-serve letter. So the circumstances change.
Right, growth pays for growth, and that goal that you're talking about is exactly what I think needs to happen there.
So I would design a different set of requirements. If I said, well, the objective is to ensure or minimize the probability that we end up with, I'll just use a non-technical term, bad septic systems, right? Septic systems that don't meet code, that pollute, et cetera, et cetera. There'd be a whole different set of processes involved if that was our objective. I think actually your process probably handles that, it seems like, unless people deliberately avoid going through your process. That's the only way we get a bad septic system, if somebody just says, well, I'm gonna go do my own, and never gonna go talk to Panhandle Health.
But what about legacy? You know, legacy, things that went on Sunset Bays down from Springy Point, about 2 miles down. That whole little subdivision down there completely failed, and this predates my time on Southside, but they allowed them to run that connection 2 miles west of Springy, put them back because their fields were all failed. That was what, in the 90s or so?
I think it was more recent than
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So why don't you state,
Sagal Valley Estates.
a policy
Long
that
time
the
ago.
county should,
But there's these bonds that Catherine was alluding to, and I think they're
Well,
real.
I guess I could think of, you could think about that, if you scroll up here, we have a goals and objectives section, right? Before we get to policies, we have goals and objectives.
yeah, but I think it should be in the policy section.
There's only just that bit of a statement.
But we can add, we can.
That's what I'm saying, because just that little one, this didn't even need a one, there's only one. Doesn't need a one.
So the thought I had was, we're having difficulty because we can't come up with anything but a fairly general statement about the agency review and evaluation and approval that we want to have happen. And we keep saying, well, at some point, we're going to go write some code that's going to get very specific about that. And would it help inform whoever it is who's writing that code about what we really meant when we crafted that general policy to have an objective that said, this is the objective that we're trying to achieve. And maybe it's to avoid creating lots where we don't have a foreseeable way to deal with septic on that lot, whether it's through a public system or a private system, whatever the case might be. To avoid creating lots that where we don't have a foreseeable method of providing water, although I know that one's difficult. Maybe we should say something to deal with the cases where it is with a public water system that's there or nearby. You probably didn't watch our meeting a week or 2 weeks ago, but I said many times, I don't think we can deal with it when you're talking about an individual private well in most cases. So it's, I don't know, what do you all think about that?
Kind of seems like it's being danced around that who wants to own the jurisdiction, who's the point of the spear. You got a change of land coming up. Who's gonna guide that process? You know, no one agency. I see everybody talking, and they're, you know, no, you go talk to DEQ, no, you talk to for water, you talk to, but I don't see. I mean, do you see it as part of your role, maybe when you go into the commissioners, to say, part of your objectives is, you know, without creating a situation that's gonna make the phone ring off the hook all 24/7. You know, somebody gonna own the you know, kind of own the point on this?
Well,
So we have, this is the land use component. We have other components that have goals, objectives, and policies. We have, under public services, we already have in a policy, we haven't reviewed these recently, but we will probably today, hopefully. One of our policies is encourage high-density development to take place within the boundaries of existing sewer and water systems. And then there's a second one, this is Bonner County should seek comment from existing service providers on their ability to serve future developments without adversely impacting the ability of utility providers to serve current users. Those are two policies that we've already approved in there. And the third one is Bonner County should provide adequate facilities for responsible, well, that's solid waste, so that's.
yeah. It's
So-
nothing.
Then I guess the question I have then, if we have these policies in the public services section, do we need them in land use?
Well, and it,
If we do, we can just import them.
Or
Maybe
just cite-
take out high density in there. Encourage development, not high density, just take it out.
either bring it over and put it in, or cite the other component. But that only covers
Public
the
utilities.
public utilities.
That doesn't cover, my.
Most of what we talked about here tonight is the private. And there's nothing in the components, look back, and there is no general,
Which one are you looking at?
I'm looking at the component, the land use
Land use.
component.
I think that part of the complication is that there's a pretty clear division between this road and between DEQ and Panhandle Health.
My name is John Lawrence. I'm a retired hydrogeologist consultant, and there's clear boundaries. If you get to 15 connections in your subdivision, you've become a public water supply system. If you stay under that, you're not. And if you're not, then DEQ doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. And if you're over so many connections, if you're dealing with a subsurface wastewater disposal system, most likely you're dealing with Panhandle Health District, because they're the ones who handle that, versus if you go with DEQ, they're primarily dealing with wastewater reuse systems, like these guys run. And there's a big difference between the two. The wastewater reuse systems are zero discharge wastewater reuse systems. The subsurface disposal systems are subsurface disposal systems. It's a way of disposing primarily of wastewater. It's not reused, and wastewater that we dispose of in the subsurface begins its journey from the leach field to surface water or the aquifer. Gets the aquifer first, and then the aquifer either goes to some stream or some lake.
Or a well.
Or a well. If your well's in between, it intercepts that. So it's hard to have a general thing when there are some pretty clear distinctions.
Yeah. There's nothing.
And I think that is what we're struggling with.
The land use designation.
But I also think it would be a mistake for us to try to embed that level of specificity in the comp plan.
Yeah.
Because one reason is, anytime that changes, even just a little bit, then your comp plan's out of sync with maybe what's, in this case, would be state law, maybe that changed somehow. And I think we know we're gonna have to have that level of specificity in the code eventually, because the code has to be that specific. And I think it's beneficial just in terms of maintaining all of this stuff over time for the county to put that stuff in one place and not have it in multiple places. And always have to go back and think about, well, now I gotta go change the ordinance so-and-so, but I also have to go back and change my comp plan because I also talked about it at that level of detail in the comp plan. So to go back to what I said 5 minutes ago, that's why I'm wondering if it would help to define objectives. I keep thinking of it as objective, but if you want to make it another policy that says we have a policy that we want to avoid creating lots, where we don't have a foreseeable means of septic disposal, whatever the right words are. That would be a policy that would, or an objective, that would help inform what we were trying to accomplish with the general statement about we want to get the review, evaluation, and/or approval of relevant state agencies.
So you're saying instead of what we've got in number 7?
Or in addition, it's in addition. Because I think it would, when it comes time to either write those ordinances or to interpret those ordinances, if they need interpretation, it would help to have a little bit more insight into what we were trying to accomplish when we wrote that general statement. Get the review, evaluation, and/or approval of the relevant state agency.
Okay, so let's add a policy. So why don't you?
So I would say, I think most of the discussion here tonight seems to have been around the idea that we want to minimize the probability of, or minimize the, I don't know what the right words are, minimize the probability of creating lots where we don't have a foreseeable means of wastewater disposal. Is that the right way to say it?
Hunter County did do that in the past. It was very rarely, I don't know, I mean, at least Matt probably knows more on this, but I know when I started that there was kind of an emphasis to not necessarily create unbuildable lots, so, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have room for lots that do retain sanitary restrictions or whatever, but if the whole goal is that as a county or community, we agree that if we're creating lots that appear to be intended for building a structure or dwelling, that those lots will have a basic utility, which is wastewater disposal and whatever the water is going to be. So, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And then back to bringing this to how that actually gets applied down the road outside of this, but in your processes. I just wanted to make this comment. I was thinking of it earlier because PhD will get agency review comments for zone changes, but we can't even comment because we have no idea. We've never been out there or anything like that. So at the point that you have your application for a zone change, then that's where you have requires a site eval. And, you get into the details at that point. But if the intent, I agree with your approach on this, because if that is the overall intent that we want, if the expectation is buildable lots, then we are at least setting some people, not setting them up for failure, at least trying to give them a base that will, we all kind of have some understanding that at least when we reviewed it, it was suitable for septic. If they ruin the site after that, that's on them, which can happen. It does happen, but I do appreciate where you're coming from with that.
Okay, good.
Could you consider maybe just,
State your name.
oh, sorry, Dave Bowman, Bar County, maybe include in 7, evaluated for adequate sewer capacity or suitability of septic, and put that right into there, and then you've kind of covered what it is that you're trying to do without having to go back to some other.
Right, we were kind of leaning that way, but it never.
Well, now it has. I'm here for you.
Oh, how would you say that?
And water.
Which is sanitary services, which is water, drinking water and wastewater disposal. If you want to be broad, the wastewater disposal is probably more appropriate because that would encompass municipal wastewater, septic.
Or confined area feeding operations.
So where are
Don't
we?
have many CAFOs around here.
So where are we now?
Right.
There's kind of an implicit goal here that we're talking about, and I wonder how many of us drink from a well in the county. I think it's about 80%.
Right here.
Right?
I don't.
I think 80% of the
Drink
people.
from a spring.
We drink from a well. And really what we're trying to talk about, I think in this whole comp plan update is preserving groundwater quality. Right? It's the reason why we care about wastewater is because we're still trying to drink the water where the water is eventually going, right? We want that groundwater quality to be an explicit goal. And I feel like there's about 9 of these topics where groundwater should be discussed as a specific objective so that we're not, we recognize the fact that that's where we drink our water because we don't.
Yeah, the other reality, someone mentioned the nitrate priority areas. We're one of the few areas of Idaho that do not have any large nitrate priority areas. And I don't say that, just, in terms of that means everything's working right, more as a caution, as a precaution, because there are plenty of examples around Idaho of, and Anna and Katie could give you a lot more information on that, but that has large impacts for drinking water system operators, potentially individual well users, also requires, even if the soils don't require additional levels of treatment within the wastewater system, those are scattered throughout Idaho. And, we're very fortunate not to have those, but, again, that's really what all of this is about.
I hope we don't have a coliform priority area. I'm more worried about that than nitrate.
Yeah, we have a bigger problem with the cyano algae blooms.
Yeah, exactly.
In our surface water than we have with nitrate priority.
Okay.
I mean, those things are actually happening.
Oh, yeah. Right here.
Every summer, here.
Yeah.
All right, so I gotta kind of bring this to a conclusion here. So we've got number 7, we've added another one that Dave suggested.
Well, I only got about half of that, sorry.
Okay, Dave, can you give it another try?
Remind the probability of
Can I-
creating lots.
Suggest how to close off number 8. Well, I would just say minimize the probability of creating lots that cannot receive the appropriate or desired and appropriate sanitary services.
Safe and sanitary.
Or cannot be supported by the appropriate.
Yeah, just close it down. The lots can't get what they want.
Too many different ideas.
Appropriate sanitary services. See how that reads. Necessary.
Because maybe eventually there are restroom considerations.
Maybe would it be clearer if we just took out the whole probability thing and just said, minimize the creation of lots? Carry on.
Yeah. Then you gotta figure out what is the problem.
Yeah.
6 and 1, is that okay?
Six, but my only hesitation about this is I don't know how black and white those evaluations are. That's my only hesitation
Well,
about that.
they're pretty good.
Yeah.
They're pretty good. It lets you know. I mean, it's a conscious look at the soils
Well, do we,
and water and setbacks and slopes and everything.
But, and again, it would be, this is the big picture. When you got down to what you're looking for with the BLP, it really should be one thing. The land development should be another, the zone change should be another. They all would be different things that you'd be looking for.
I think we've done about what we can at this comp plan level, so I appreciate everybody participating
And what
and all your suggestions.
I'm envisioning the application of this, so here it says, so yes, a lot of this is going to end up in code, but whether it's at the front counter, like we talked about before, information that gets handed to a potential applicant. Here's the litany of things that you got to look at. Now, it's up to them to read it, and try to be as concise as possible, but just that kind of primer come in the door, out the door, you're going to have to look at these things yourself. You're going to be the applicant. You're responsible for your application. Make sure it's good.
I remember the day, it wasn't that long ago, I go in and get a billing location. That was actually good then. And I literally have to physically take that and go get Ed or Ken or John's signature on it and then take it back and
Yeah.
then take that original, drive it down to the fire district, have them
Yeah.
sign it.
Yeah. You bet.
So I'm glad we can maybe do this.
I mean, the last time you pulled a look, it was 96? Where you been?
All right, so are there any other suggestions for the policies for land use, or have we done land use?
Can we address, on number, I have a comment
Oh,
regarding number 9, the Alpine.
elevation.
Thank you. John, once again, I think that on the Alpine Village zoning district, one of the things that needs to be taken into consideration of that, in addition to the steep slopes and elevation above 3,500 feet, is one thing that happens when we move to that elevation and above is we've moved out of the valleys completely, and now we're drilling and providing water out of bedrock. And that is a completely different scenario than trying to pump it out of the Rathdrum Prairie or a valley-filled porous media aquifer. And so I think that really needs to be taken into consideration.
Also,
Tied back to number 8.
Pardon?
Tied back to number 8. And John won't sign off anymore on that.
Well, it simply would be that part of the problem is when we deal with trying to deal with water supply, almost all the tools that we have are for porous media, valley fill aquifers. And when we try to take those porous media, valley fill aquifers and move them up, those tools for that, and move them up onto a steep hillside in granite and apply those, it doesn't work.
What do they do now? I mean, there's a lot of condos up there.
Well,
Couple of water sources.
they cross their fingers and hope it rains. No, literally, I mean, it is a major problem in bedrock areas, is trying to evaluate the available water supply is much, much more difficult than it is down in the valley. And if we're going to have an area that is specified as being up in the mountains where it's really difficult to develop adequate water supplies, I think that should be mentioned in that's part of the deal with that district, is that you have to take extra measures to determine, when you're trying to figure out your water supply.
Well, does a
There's
water
a whole
resource
bunch of, there's a
sign
whole
off
bunch
on
of,
that? That you have that ability to pull that much out of the ground?
Their signature does not mean that there's no.
They do, but that doesn't mean anything. It's a piece of paper. I mean, it's for all, and also whoever ends up doing that, if they look at that and they apply valley fill porous media aquifer, and they say, well, it's like, if the recharge area for a well is 1,000 square miles, that's good. If the recharge area for a well is less than 1/10 of a square mile, that's not good. And up in the mountains, all the rain that falls in Montana is no help at all. The only water available in the mountains is what has fallen up there last winter and then melted and didn't run off. Almost all of it did.
Right, so-
I guess the question I have is, what would we do differently than what we already said we were gonna do in 7 and 8? Because 7 and 8 still apply to the Alpine zone. So we're still gonna, we have a policy that we're gonna minimize the creation of lots.
there's a whole lot of code sections that deal with
Yeah.
the Alpine District, the design standards and so on. All we're saying here is that the zoning district should be maintained to provide adequate design and development standards for high-density recreational community, with steep slopes. Maybe, I guess we could say steep rocky slopes and heavy snowfall at elevations above 3,500 feet. But this was meant to create a policy that says we need to look at the Alpine Village separately as a whole different development possibility.
And that's what I'm saying, we need to look at water supply.
I'm sure we do, but that's.
In a
that's for the-
completely different-
That's for the zoning district and design standards.
Yeah, okay.
For that. And we can't really get into that specific.
This was a throw out from me, Mr. Chair. Currently, the Alpine Village zoning district calls out 3,000 feet in elevation, and
You were going to check that.
it does, that's what I'm reporting back. So I checked that,
So
it's
check-
3,000, and I can show you what a topo looks like on 3,000 versus 35 versus 4,000.
Well, let's just change it to 3,000.
Okay?
Is there a downside to just changing it to 3,000?
Well, you might want to look at like the area in which you're covering at the different elevations. So,
Well, you're saying the zoning district is wrong?
Well, one of them
no, there's a discrepancy between the zoning district and the current land use designation.
If
So-
there's a valley floor at 3,000 feet, is that alpine?
defined by elevation or?
Right now it's defined by elevation.
Above 3,500. I don't believe.
Is there a reason
Alex
why
wanted
the
to
zoning
know.
district is 3,000 instead of 3,500?
I don't have the details as to why they picked the number.
Do you have the map, the topo map?
I have, yeah.
I was looking at it, 'cause I tried to ferret it out from the topo.
Do you need us to?
No, I think you've been very helpful, and I would invite you back when we get into the code.
Yes, please.
I'm happy to study land use planning, but I didn't sit for the APA.
So I found this tool, our GIS wasn't able to get this done by the meeting tonight, but they're gonna put together a tool that's similar to this. But the orange area here is 4,000 feet, so you can see where Schweitzer sits. This is 3,000 to 4,000, so your 3,500 is between these two lines.
So that's 3,000.
So this is 3,000 down here at the bottom.
Wouldn't the top of Baldy Road be 3,000?
Pretty close, probably.
I think you put all those houses up.
There's Pine Street,
They're on Baldy.
Yeah, you put, that would all be up, all of, a lot of.
pretty close.
Baldy Road.
Well,
In the Alpine.
fortunately, it doesn't have roads.
4,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you skied a lot here, you know, above 4,000, that's where it begins.
So, does that help?
Let's leave it at 3,500 then.
3,250?
Going try.
What lines can you see now?
So we'll go, which one's at 3,500?
3,500 sits,
Brownish.
so this is 4,000.
Oh, that's 4,000.
3,500 is this line here. And I gave you guys a link to this in
Oh,
the
yeah.
document itself. So this is an outside tool. It's something I found that colored topo maps for us, so.
So.
The yellow is 3,000 or 3,500?
3,000 is this bottom of the yellow line. 3,500 is about halfway. This is 4,000.
So even that, the brown or tannish color and the pink is the 4,000?
So this is 4,000. I think this gets up to 45 or 5,000.
Okay.
And that's a 5,000 foot line.
So kind of focusing on Schweitzer Properties or the other name, where does that leave? It looks like it, I don't know. I mean,
So all of the villages above 4,000.
Yeah.
And I
That
think all of
area-
the ski runs are above 4,000 as well.
The area to the east that they're now talking about, that they've claimed has been included all along. I thought they were making the argument for 3,000.
Yeah, I think their property bench goes down to 3,000 or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's the thing.
I think,
So they were trying to say, if it goes to 3,000, then we could have split designation or split zoning or something, and they didn't think that was appropriate.
Well,
I do have a hand raised online if you want to.
What are the implications over in the Avenets? Is all of that public land? So you call it.
Oh, my goodness.
No, there's some private.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty steep, pretty quick.
It's so steep over there. You got a little ribbon of below 33,000.
But there are gonna be some private properties there down close to the lake.
Yeah, all up around Trestle Creek.
Yeah.
It comes up faster, slower.
Yeah.
This is a free
So I guess my
website
question is,
anybody
do
can
we-
access.
That stuff isn't currently part of the Alpine Zone.
Correct.
So do we need to have a separate criteria that we're only talking about around, Selkirk's, Schweitzer, however you want to term it? Or, because I don't think we want to lump those other guys into the Alpine Zone, do we?
If you guys want to limit the creation of any new zoning, then yeah, I think we could add some geographic bounds or some other things to that zoning district.
the zoning district already has geographic boundaries, doesn't it?
For the
It
Alpine,
has to.
yeah, for Alpine.
Otherwise, yeah, that's what I said.
Right.
Well, my question is the only geographic bound, the elevation, or do we define it? I know we draw it with a different geographic bound, but do we define it in the code differently? Or is it just everything above X feet? I don't know.
I'll pull up I only copied half of the definition.
And if it's only written as everything above a certain elevation in the county, you're
I
gonna
think-
bump in a bunch of other stuff.
Well, you have to,
Probably not.
it has to be comp plan designated a certain way, right? So that's the
True,
first
yeah.
layer.
Well,
Then you
not
get
anymore. Right, that's the concern we're trying to address here, not anymore.
Don't open that can of worms.
Alpine Village District. This is higher elevation community.
Yeah.
Right behind Hope, and a new.
Right now, it's
Alpine
greater
Village
than
coming.
3,000 feet in elevation. And,
I think the
yep. Our areas in the county
Parking lot
generally
stuff.
greater than 3,000 feet in elevation that support and complement mountain recreational activities.
Well, there is that qualifier, but that's maybe a little vague.
That's pretty big. That's pretty much all of them. Everything above 3,000 feet. Hunting.
Hiking, yeah.
Berries.
Snowshoeing,
Snowshoeing.
mountain biking.
Yeah.
Based on this, somebody could come in elsewhere in the county and request.
Can you read that? I can't even.
I like that again for Alan, so you can.
So it's B. This is really the qualifier.
Use of the zone is appropriate in areas designated as alpine community by the comprehensive plan. All right, there's one qualifier. Areas the county fair generally greater than 3,000 feet in elevation that support and complement on recreation activities. Complement. No, it's still pretty
So
wide
we
open.
would change that, correct me if I'm wrong, right? We would change that to areas designated as, what did we decide to call it, recreation or resort?
Recreational community.
Recreational community.
Residential?
And then leave the rest of those qualifiers, support mountain recreation. And then that would exclude all those places over to the east side of the lake because they're not designated as, well, some of them are. Don't we have some of those?
Do they hit above that elevation line?
I don't know.
I don't-
You'd
No, so I'm
have to
thinking,
look
like,
at that.
if I'm pretty sure that the parking lot at the bottom of Scotchman Peak is 3,000 feet.
So,
But it may not
Yeah,
be
so-
recreation.
But that is designated recreation
It is?
Is it?
I don't think.
by the Forest Service.
Well, but no, it's a
Yeah,
question
that
of
means
what's our land use
that means we've
designation.
designated every boat.
And if it's on
If it's
Forest
owned by the
Service land,
county.
we don't have jurisdiction anyway. That's the first thing, you don't have to worry about anything that's
Yeah. Not under the county's jurisdiction.
federal land, right? So,
So we're still dealing with whether we put 3,500 or 3,000. We're not changing the code right now.
No, we're just looking at it to see where it goes. Well,
I mean, there's a lot of changes to the code we have to make.
well, again, if Schweitzer Properties or whoever have property down to 3,000 feet elevation, 35 would end up with a split zone or a split designation. That was their concern.
They have property all the way down to the valley floor.
Yeah, so it's not even 3,000.
Because they own it.
They own the apartment complex.
Well, true.
No, but I mean coming down the hill. all
The-
way
the-
down
the
South
piece that they've been
Shore.
talking
Right,
about
and then
lately,
the
down
property,
past
they
the
also
road
have
tracks.
property
Yeah, but
that's
take
right
that
in-
out.
so,
Yeah, that's not designated. Those aren't designated.
but even if they do, that's not an argument, even in this area where we're talking about generally over in Selkirk's, that's not an argument to bring everything above whatever elevation that is into this
their
designation. Well, they want their property
Right.
zoned that way. That's a different discussion
Designated as
in my mind.
Yeah.
than
Totally.
everything above X feet, whatever
Oh, yeah.
that is.
Right.
Right? Because then we're including a bunch of other property that isn't theirs, which
Not
we
necessarily.
certainly don't want to do that.
Not necessarily intended for that.
Right.
So going back again, 3,500 or 3,000?
I think I'm inclined to,
Eliminate it?
Leave it at 3 or
no, I think I'd be inclined to leave it high.
Yeah, leave it
And
at
then
35.
force the separate discussion about whether their property should be zoned that way.
Okay.
In the right
And-
right venue,
when we get to the zoning code.
if they're not happy with that.
Make it consistent with the comp plan, make it 35.
And then if the code, if the zoning district needs to change, then it should be changed specifically, based on an application from them to change their parcels. Does that make sense? Then you don't wrap in a whole bunch of other stuff that's at the same elevation.
Okay, good. So we'll leave it that as it is.
We do have a hand up online if we want to allow for some public comment.
Who is it?
Mr. Flint Hall. Flint?
Who is it?
Flint Hall.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a couple of comments. One of them in discussion with with where it is said that specific elevation, it's really a factor of the geology, and there may be statewide geologic coverages that tell you when you're hitting the hard rock, which is exactly when you can't produce enough water to have individual wells, and you need some kind of public water system. And I think that would also come into play with the health district and their requirement related to suitability for septics in that particular area. You're likely not going to be able to find a site that would meet conditions allowable for septics. So it seems those are particular factors that really the geology that you can have some kind of coverage for might help guide. It's not going to be the level of detail you need, but as opposed to a certain elevation, maybe there's value in an elevation, but really it's the hydrogeology it's the geology that controls what you can do to deal with the source of water and the disposal.
Well, I assume they have some kind of wastewater disposal up there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they have a reuse system essentially, but that would, within the realm of the on-site disposal, it would be the same evaluation process, and the
Right.
site conditions would dictate the system. But
They
yeah,
operate
he's
the
absolutely
largest
right.
wastewater reuse facility in the state. That's why.
Right, I mean, that's, we're trying to recognize here that there needs to be, the special design development standards for that area need to be maintained.
That's all this, yeah, that's this whole exercise was to put that back in, because it was in the code, in the comp plan before, and somehow it slipped out.
It seems like, in that last sentence of number 9 there, heavy snowfall and elevations, once we're at 3,500 feet, heavy snowfalls, not really,
Well,
well, sometimes, it wasn't this year. I mean, if it's truly the alpine characteristics of Schweitzer in particular that we're dealing with, elevation is a really minor component of that. Absolutely, I mean, the absolute elevation, I know it certainly is a convenient thing to be able to use as a definition that above this elevation it is and below it isn't. But it's really only a small part of what makes the alpine.
and true, and that was part of the discussion, like I just said, some of the qualifiers for going into that zone and working in it were, for whatever reason, not in the comprehensive plan, so the desire was to put it back in. And these, again, just like talking, the previous discussion about septic and so forth, this gets you started. You come in, you say, well, okay, I'm above 3,500, what does it do? And there's various things that need to be done, design standards, the snow load. If you're in the village, you've got a design for 250 pounds a square foot, et cetera, et cetera. So those kind of things are back in here, and they're certainly in the code under Alpine zone.
right. Anything else on land use when we'll move on to another part of this?
It's just something that says.
Natural resources, we didn't really cover this, did we?
Not much. You have another hand up, Mr. Chair.
Okay, who is it?
Suzanne.
Whoever's online, just state your name and.
Hi, Suzanne Glasgow, Bonner County. I just wanted to take the opportunity while you're switching segments to thank each one of the commissions. You guys work really well together. You're very professional when you come in. You're very dedicated. I know some of these meetings go more than 3 hours. You have your own personal lives and you're very dedicated to this. And you probably don't hear it enough, but I wanted to thank each and every one of you sincerely for everything that you do for making this happen and for communicating with the public and with the outside agencies for what's going to be the ultimate plan. But I know you've put a lot of time into this, and I just wanted to really thank you.
Well, thank you, appreciate that.
For some reason, I thought we went over natural resources last week.
I thought we did too. I've got a lot of notes, but now I know I can't remember what they say.
I think we did. We changed, took out number one.
What I have is that you guys deleted number 1, and that's the only change that I have.
All right, so I have a note here that there are some land use strategies on pages 4 and 5 of the component. So you want to pull those up?
There a mouse in here? What's that? A mouse. Oh, okay.
Can I make a comment? 5.4.
I'm not sure what you're referring to here.
To protect water, I just wanted, under 5. I know it's not 5, it's 5, number 4, yeah. My eyesight's not that great. Protect water quality, creating standards for development. In the early 90s, DEQ.
We get the microphone over to him, so.
It's just.
Went through a big process of developing a total maximum daily load for the nearshore waters of the lake. And it was a big process of going through and determining how much phosphorus can we release into the lake from our developments along the shoreline without causing problems with algae growth and so on. And as a part of that process, there was a whole implementation plan developed for meeting this total maximum daily load. And it's another one of those things where there was a great plan all formulated and put together, and it's on a shelf somewhere. And if these are some of our goals, I think that we might want to think about referencing those, or at least there's again, it's like there's a whole document about how things we would want to implement to protect water quality.
I think that goes way beyond what we're doing here, though. This is
Okay.
protect shorelines. I mean, I understand the TMDL process and all that, but this is a pretty general document.
Yeah.
So, but I appreciate that. So, I don't know what I was referring to. So,
Is it these, like provide a physical link or copy link assistant?
That was one of them, yeah. I was just going through and trying to go back and forth. I think we've captured most of
I
it.
think we've captured like number 5 has that same link I think we had this discussion last meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
No discussion.
I mean, some of the other ones were, you know, setbacks between structures and shorelines. Got that. Stormwater flow control measures on properties that slope towards shorelines.
Okay, so we covered that. So what about economic development? Did we do that one? I think we did.
I think we did too.
Public services, I don't think we touched that.
Good, public services.
So we got 5 goals and objectives and 3 policies.
So I think this one was, public services, I thought, I don't know, let's see what my notes are, but I think we needed to move those 3 objectives down into policies.
Which 3, the first 3?
No, 3, 4,
Well,
and 5, I
I'm looking
think.
at something different.
Yeah, there's 5. I think 3, 4, 3, 4, and 5.
I guess it would be the last 3.
3, 4, and 5, yeah.
3, 4,
Somewhere
5.
we've got a draft that shows that. But the question there is, so what was goal, objective number 3? New development should be adequately served by fire protection, roads, sewer. That's the question. What is sewer? What is septic?
Can you fall back to sanitary services like was suggested earlier?
We developed that terminology in the other part, so let's put it here.
Get rid of the water.
Fire protection, roads, sanitary services, law enforcement. Is that right? Schools?
Yeah. Schools, law enforcement, ambulance, power. What do you want to lump water in with sanitary services? But that water, comma, sanitary services.
Right,
Kind
sanitary
of go
services
together better.
would include,
I think what Catherine's saying is
Get rid of water.
sanitary services includes water.
right. So we
Yeah.
need to take water out. Any other suggestions rather than
So-
moving those 3 down?
What private services are we referring to there?
Yeah.
That isn't included.
Ballet.
Well, yeah. It's,
That in my neighborhood.
Well, and just from the realm that we work, that could be a non-public shared water system. It could be
Yeah.
like the example of a community system that doesn't reach that public threshold, because there is that in between individual and public level, just as an example. But that would capture that.
But this topic is public utilities.
well,
So-
yeah, public services, facilities, it's kind of doesn't fit, but
Yeah.
there's no other place that talks about private facilities.
Well, we just
So
spent a whole,
right here under public
we just spent
services,
2 hours
it
talking
says-
about it in the land use section. In the
Correct,
context of
correct.
private
Yeah.
sanitary services.
Yep. Yeah, so it's covered there.
The way that heading is written, does that mean that only utilities that are public, or does it mean?
That's the
public
name of the
facilities and
component.
Services and utilities? Serious question.
No, it's public services, facilities, and utilities.
I think the
Because I would
public,
consider sanitary
Public
services
services,
utilities.
this,
Public defines all of them.
yeah, I think, yeah.
if you go to the component, you get that definition out of Idaho code for this component. And that's what it talks about. So
That's copyright from the back, the way it's written there.
you could expand to say public services, public facilities, and public utilities.
It's okay.
That's a good question.
I just wanted to know.
It's a good
Well,
question.
because,
Because there's a difference.
Yeah.
yeah, and
Well, yeah.
Dave isn't the only guy who's going to ask that, so.
Well, I don't know about that.
It might be.
I can think of a few people who might ask that. So be ready with an answer. So with that
I'm
change.
just
One
gonna
of-
throw
one
this
of the-
out there, but that number 1 of my first thought with that is, encourage high-density development, blah, blah, blah. Maybe something about, in existing sewer and water areas with adequate capacity or something like that, because, we would hate to take this the wrong way and have people going and developing an area. I mean, I'm not saying you have to add anything with that, but it would hinge on whether that whether that utility has capacity.
Or the ability to act.
Maybe since we're already mentioned boundaries, that we need to talk about area in the next line down, because the area is defined by the boundary. We're talking about
Existing
sewer and water,
utilities, maybe.
you know, providers or utilities or whatever, not a geographic area.
Well, yeah, we actually talked about that, putting the word district boundaries. Because they're districts. A district has a little more definition than an area. And that's what we're aiming at, is sewer and water districts to serve higher density development.
Okay, change areas to districts.
Yep. You want to add the with adequate capacity?
I see number two, well, I actually went down to number 2 now, you guys are sort of talking about that there, I would say. Because you wanted to do that without adversely impacting
Yeah.
utility providers.
So that means they
That
have
was
the
the intent
capacity.
of that one.
They have capacity.
That sort of goes into the, whether they can issue a will serve letter or not. So did we decided to take out private services? Private?
Well, I mean,
Guess it.
my first question is, what does it mean?
I don't know, so
There's
let's
somebody
take it out.
who needs a full of.
Yeah,
Let's
well,
take it out.
it's
The
just
second
that.
question is, it's in the public
You've got
utility
a water
section.
system that serves less than 25 same people and so forth, 23 and a
Let's
quarter.
take, or private out.
But isn't that private still?
Right, but it doesn't fall under
not a
public
public-
services.
But we,
Not
but
a
we,
public,
right, yeah, so it shouldn't be here, yeah.
Cut it
We're in
out.
violent agreement.
Very good.
All right, anything else in this section? I think a lot of the changes that we're going to be dealing with here are moving some of these objectives into the policies and making sure they make sense.
We did that.
And there is, there's clearly going to be overlap between these various goals and objectives and policies for these individual components and the land use, because that's just the way it is. Yeah, that's the way it is. All right. I want to go to transportation?
It's almost 7 o'clock.
Transportation, I'd move 2 through 9 into policies.
You want to move which ones, number 2 through 9?
2 through 9.
You guys think there's more to come that related to sewage
I think we've
for tonight?
we've done that one, I
Okay.
think.
We
We
thought you'd
really
just like to
really
hang out
do.
with us.
Yeah.
To put it
We really-
colloquially, we really flushed that one out.
Submission.
Sorry.
We really appreciate how
Thanks.
how available you guys are.
Oh, we
Very appreciated.
really appreciate your willingness to meet with us, this discussion, and just like that lady said online, your commitment to this whole process is very commendable. Like, really, it's really impressive to watch you guys work. If you would like, I have some basic resources regarding septic systems.
Oh, that'd be great.
At a
Sure.
meeting, and
Yeah,
also
that'd be
just
great.
My card, and then you probably know how to get a hold of Catherine, just if you want a conversation going, any way that we can help. Good.
We'll be calling you back.
Excellent. We'll hear from the process.
One of the things we included in here is an internal between DEQ and the health district's memo for RV parks, because this
Oh,
seems to be
that'll
such
be
a
handy.
topic of
Yeah, we're coming up
I
soon.
wanted you guys to understand the process, that if you want to look at it, you can see that we have a statewide process for handling them. And I noticed, I just want to add this because I got cut off with a different meeting, I'm not sure where it even landed, but Mr. Doty was commenting on his RV park, and I just wanted to clarify that never did get approval from us, but it stemmed from a requirement that we need a clear letter of intended use when someone is doing an RV park, because we're not only looking at the RVs, just how many RVs, we're looking at, are they gonna be used as permanent dwellings, or are they not? Are they also gonna provide centralized facilities that might have laundry, showers, blah, blah, blah? We're looking for a little more detail, So we had never received that back in regards to that specific RV park, and so we couldn't move it forward. We certainly could move it forward if he gives us the information we need, and he's within the realm of things. But I just wanted to share that memo because it is a statewide document, and it might help you guys to understand how we're looking at things. And just kind of the challenges of it, because you can see there's a flow chart in the back of that, and it's like, there's so many different potential scenarios with all these land use things. RV parks could have whatever, so
Yeah.
it just gets challenging, but there are a lot of options, and it's just mostly a matter of people coming to us and talking with us, and so we can figure out their options, because it's not always straightforward.
And the goal is really to help the counties, deal with this, because RVs in general are a big problem in every county.
Just out of curiosity, so if the developer of the RV park says, well, it's just, recreational use, and then it turns into a permit, how do you enforce that then?
Well, we size based on the recreational vehicle unless it's classified as a dwelling. So there's even some information and some guidance on that specific. But it's difficult because they're vehicles essentially, right? So, we size those septic systems based on use from recreational vehicles. But in situations where that's being classified as a dwelling, then there's separate guidance that required. Just to help with the septic system sizing component, because the assumption is there's going to be more wastewater generated, so the system is sized appropriately.
Why do you have two different standards? Why wouldn't you just assume they're going to be permanent and size it accordingly?
A lot of people would argue about that.
Yeah,
We have a hard time selling it.
Yeah, that's a whole separate discussion, but really that's the interesting thing when you look at actual measured wastewater flow from the RV parks. Actually, I'd love to talk to you about the Silverwood system, but you'll see that in RV parks where people are living there full time as a residence versus a recreational subdivision.
Yeah, it's more spotty use.
And so there's also a mechanism within that process where we can size the system accordingly if we get data showing lower RV uses, and we've done that in several examples within Panhandle District. That's why I really like it. I'm really interested in flow data from Silverwood if it's kind of split out that way. But
Okay, great, thank you.
I've been taking up
Thank you
time.
so much.
Anytime you would like to come in, let us know.
Okay.
Very productive, thank you.
So back to this one, it looks like, so if we, let's first talk about taking goals, objectives 2 through 9 and put them into policies. Number 8, existing goal objective is very similar, if not identical, to number 3 policy. So one of them needs to go away or combine them.
Are we
Bike-
number 8 under policy?
Yeah,
right now?
bikeways and pedestrian paths should be considered in development plans, and then policy says bike and pedestrian trails should be considered in development proposals. So they start out the same, they're redundant at first.
Take one out.
Yeah, I think you can just eliminate one.
Which one you want to eliminate?
Goal number 8 is less words than policy number 3. It adds wherever possible. Oh, that's, and connect with, that's the connectivity issue. All right, that's not stated in, well, it is, an integrated community transportation system wherever possible. Different way of saying it. Which one does everybody like? Who likes number 8? Who likes number 3?
I think they're identical, aren't they?
Almost.
Quite, but close.
Slightly different way of saying it, that's all. Is it integrated system or connect the communities with existing?
But is that, I mean, to me, I almost argue that's the same thing,
Yes.
said two different ways.
Right, it is. So which one goes away? Fewer words,
Fewer words.
less electrons?
Yeah, let's use fewer words.
So let's use number 8.
I don't know, I think getting rid of the one that has wherever possible is better.
Well, yeah.
By Harold.
Well, they both say wherever possible.
Oh, they do, yeah, my bad.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Nice objective statement.
Anything else on that?
Also, the goal, if we keep number 1 as the goal, number 2 says it with more words. So does that need to be? I guess it could be the first policy. There really isn't one of that nature in existing policies. Okay, so that one's okay. Roads built county standard. Roads within new development should provide free access for fire and emergency vehicles, okay. Future access roads should be designed and built to integrate with the state and county systems, yeah. Reduce transportation cost building cluster development, okay. Communicate and work cooperatively with other jurisdictions within the county to ensure the best possible flow of traffic countywide. Yeah.
What we now have is policy number 8. I think we have to change that, versus Warren County intends for certain intense land use developments to provide paved roads. We have to change that to hard surface roads, because that's the definition that.
Yeah, right.
Warren County Road and Bridge.
Right, hard surface roads. Right, thanks, man. Okay.
Anything else?
7 o'clock. No?
I wonder in number 8 if the word intense wouldn't be a high density or what is intense development?
Oh, yeah, we had that discussion too. Yeah, how do you
I think-
qualify intense?
Could that also mean, I mean, certainly it could mean imply density in a residential area, but it could also apply high levels of traffic in a commercial or industrial
Yeah, do a
area.
gravel pit or a,
Yeah, or.
When you modify it with certain, that kind of gives you, you can then designate in the code what those certain intense uses are.
Well,
It is not specific, but
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, I'm okay with
But
it.
again, if this is not that specific of a level,
Right.
at this level.
Yeah. Right, so that's where the land use tables or matrix would come in.
Right.
Isn't it redundant with the one that says roads within a new development? Oh, I guess not.
All right. You have any suggestions here? We good?
I'm good with it as is.
All right. Let's keep moving.
Wait a minute, I'm thinking of something.
Oh, don't give
There
Don
was
too
a
much
push,
time.
there was a push from a couple different groups, and I think it's in the component where it said Bonner County will never require a land developer to dedicate roadway or bike paths.
It's in recreation.
That's in recreation.
It's not that, but
Well, it's something along those lines.
yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It's
it is.
access.
Under no circumstances will Bonner County require access easements on private property.
Right.
All right, so slightly different,
That's in recreation.
because here we're saying bike paths and part of subdivisions and so forth. I don't know if that goes against that statement, or,
I don't think so.
On recreation, actually, like number 1, the goal objectives as a policy.
Are we on recreation now?
we just kind of slipped into recreation.
I think we kind of did, but I didn't know.
I think we're okay with transportation.
I think, the way that's written, goal number 1, it is I mean, I always think of the difference as it telling us what we want to accomplish or how we want to accomplish it. And that's saying what we want to accomplish, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that says on policy number 1, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it calls up waterways and park access program.
What?
And access to public recreational lands and waterways. Versus 1 kind of calls out the whole recreational opportunity.
Oh, the policies, okay. Yeah, the goal is broader than that policy.
And I look at the goal is what, and for instance, policy one is outlining a couple of different things we're going to do to accomplish that objective. So we're going to develop a waterway and park access program to preserve and develop access to public lands and waterways. That's a how, or how are we going to protect and encourage public and private recreational opportunities, where one way is we'll develop a waterways and park access program to preserve and develop access.
Right, but, excuse me.
So the second is a how, and the number one under goals and objectives is a what. That makes sense?
Yeah, it kind of does to me, but I think one is too limiting in the fact that it's primary.
Because it only talks about waterways and.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
And
think.
parks? Is parks not?
Park access.
I mean, it's more than parks, it's waterways and public lands, really.
I was just gonna say public land.
Yeah, and that's public lands, but we can also go ahead and protect, encourage, public and private recreational opportunities. I think that's already called out someplace, probably
That's in the goal.
Where it calls out, everything from, cross-country skiing, mountain biking, you name it. I don't know, I would like to see that policy number one broaden, not so much as waterways and park access or access to public lands, but to encourage the public and private recreational opportunities that supports, the county's economy.
Well, I think part of what I think I'm hearing you saying, I don't know, is you want some more specific delineation of what recreational opportunities we're trying to protect?
Sure. That we can add those other opportunities, policy number one, or make goal number one into a separate policy, or expand number one with that language.
I'd be okay with that.
Okay, I'm kind of lost, guys. We're talking about goal number one. We're going to change that?
My suggestion was to add something, either move that to a policy or add what's in policy number one right now to broaden it to include public and private recreational opportunities as an asset that supports key segment of the county's economy.
That's goal number one. That's a goal.
Right, it's a goal, but I think we should have something along that lines in policies as well. Because policy number one there primarily deals with waterways and also access to public lands. But it doesn't deal with a recreational opportunity to go ahead and help support the county's economy.
All right, so I think that number two, the goals and objectives is really a policy. And then we can add, I don't know, I hate to be repetitive, but
Well, does it help your concern, Matt, if, like in goal one, if we said protect and encourage public and private recreational opportunities and add a such as statement and list?
If we move that to policies, then I would be.
You still want that in policies?
Yep.
What's left for goals?
Yeah.
We need a goal.
I agree, by the way, with Alan that number two should be,
Yeah, that makes sense.
should be a policy.
Yeah, so existing policy number one was just broadened out a little bit to essentially say public and private recreational opportunities. And maybe it is, such as waterways, park access, public lands. But it says
I don't know.
public recreational lands and waterways.
I'm reading between the lines and trying to understand Matt's concern.
Yeah.
Are you concerned that some recreational opportunities will not get the support they need?
Correct.
If we
Well, I
don't, if
think-
we
I
don't
think
specifically delineate them here?
I think it's too narrowly tailored on policy number one. If we don't include some of those other, private, recreational opportunities, because they are definitely an asset to the county's economy.
Public and private recreational opportunities, that's pretty broad. Why, by adding qualifiers in there, that narrows it.
Yeah.
This is really broad the way it is. Encourage public and private recreational opportunities. That's very broad. That's a real objective. That's real. But the problem is existing policy number one narrowly, it limits it to, waterways and parkways, and then the second part of the sentence, access to public recreational lands and waterways. So it's a three-front policy, but is that not inclusive enough of everything? It doesn't say private. We can put private in there.
We could also, what we could do is we could move that down, and maybe if the goal is what we've got in the introduction to the component here. The goal in this plan is to strive to promote our need for diverse recreational opportunities while preserving the area's scenic character and ecological systems.
Oh, yeah, where'd you come up with that?
That's out of the component.
That's out of the component.
So that should be.
So that should be the goal.
Verbatim as the goal.
Then we can move the current goal down.
Combine it with the first existing policy somehow?
Yeah, I'd say, make one policy statement out of goal one and policy one.
Where's that at in the?
It's in the introduction.
It's in the introduction, the first paragraph, second to the last sentence.
What about if on the policies, it just was reduced to the county's encouraged to develop an access program or a program to preserve and develop access to public recreational lands and waterways?
I think, that's,
Do we need to have a public land access program to develop access?
yeah, I think what we tried to do was we tried to say that, but then we also said that the county shouldn't be exacting access for a development approval.
But, and a lot of it was discussion around waterways, waterways specifically because of what the waterways are, and there's considerable amount of public access to those waterways. With some private property around it, but considerable. I think of Pack River, it's got lots and lots of fishing game access.
So we've got, we got boating, water skiing, canoeing, kayaking, river rafting, jet skiing, downhill skiing, cross-country skiing, golfing, equestrian, hunting, berry picking, mushrooming, snow capping, dog sled racing. We got a lot of stuff in there.
Pickleball.
Do we need to put it all in the policy? I mean, it's in the
All
component.
right, we did. We didn't
So I
mention
thought we were gonna
pickleball.
take what's number one up there, Jake, and combine it down with policy number one somehow and just leave what Alan just said as the
Out of
only
the
goal and
component.
objective.
Yeah, out of the introduction, the component, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good statement, and it goes along with this.
And then move the protect and encourage down to,
Yeah, that's basically.
Part of
Can you
policy
just,
one.
combine it with that policy number one, or?
Somehow recraft the words to incorporate both.
They're a little different because, I mean, 2 talks about opportunities and 1 is very focused on access.
And maintaining the viability, the economic viability.
Yeah, and access is
But number 2.
a more narrow interpretation of opportunities.
Now, policy 2 talks about
Opportunities.
supports is a key segment of the county's economy,
Yep.
so that covers that.
Yep, I'm not sure we should work too hard to combine them, actually.
Okay.
Okay?
Because they are a little different. One is specific about access and the other is opportunities, which is a broader.
Opportunities would support a key segment of the county's economy. All right, any other changes?
I got a question on 3. So under no circumstances will the county require access easements on private property as a condition of development. I'm guessing you mean recreational.
Or recreation purposes.
Because we require easements all the time for access. So I can see someone take that and say, hey, the
You can't require me to do that.
If we want to specify recreational access easements.
Yes.
Yeah, recreational access, right.
Which would either be a bike pedestrian path or an access corridor to a public body or something. That was the gist of it. But mainly was focusing on, we don't want bike paths required of our.
I think the thought was to not require access over private property to access like a lake or a river.
Yeah.
As a condition of being able to build a house. I think the thought was not to become California.
This is as a condition of development, so that would even be, like, let's say the county creates a trail master plan, right? We say this is the connectivity plan through the county or through this area. A lot of other states, they require even on land division, especially on land division, right? That the trail gets dedicated or an easement gets dedicated or the trail gets built as a condition of approval. So what I'm reading here is we're saying we're going to develop the program and it's going to be voluntary on the individuals if they want to.
Right, so if a guy voluntarily concludes a bike trail system through that connects to the roads, fine.
So how does this intersect with, I've never had to deal with them, but do we have provisions where you can get density credits in return for providing some common lands? And the amount of credits you get is dependent on whether it's public access or not public access?
Yeah, so PUDs and I think conservation subdivisions both have some provisions about density increases. So you get bonus, right? So number of dwellings per acre type idea. We've only had one large scale PUD in the last 4 or 5 years. That was that one up at Priest Lake area. And they didn't, I mean, they qualified for a bunch of density bonuses, but they didn't get any, essentially. The number of lots they wanted to build was sufficient for what their project was, so.
The county didn't require them to provide access to the golf course?
No. I think they did, they added a stub out to the golf course, but there was some frustration between the golf course community and the new community coming in. They didn't want each other to use each other's roads. So I think it's there and a gate or something along those lines. And it's all private roads, privately maintained.
So my question though still is, how would this statement intersect with that stuff we have in the code, which, I mean, even though maybe it hasn't been used very often, it seems like something we want to continue to offer.
Why don't we say in here, in return for access easements or density bonuses?
Yeah, set it up that way.
Yeah.
Come, Dave.
Well, I was just, because I was thinking along the same lines, but to say that you're not going to require it doesn't mean that you can't offer it.
Or encourage it, yeah.
Right, offer, encourage.
Yeah. Well, and that doesn't.
Bonus if that situation should arise. I know other municipalities,
Require
that
it.
type of stuff, well, or use it a lot. If some developer wants to do something, well, how about you give a.
Well, okay, but that's, yeah, I mean, the point here was, the county's not gonna require it.
Right.
And other topics, other discussions take place in the planning office. I mean, you know, you come in, you say, I'd like to do this. If they don't offer it, the county staff's not gonna say, well, wait a minute, have you considered trails, or, no. Maybe a discussion, but there's not gonna be a requirement by.
No, I agree. That's what I'm saying.
But
Saying
why-
you're not going to require it doesn't mean it can't be offered or discussed.
So the second
It's
sentence.
a slippery,
kind of
it's a
says-
slippery slope, though.
Yeah,
Well, we
it's,
got a
So
lot
if you want to build your house, then you have to provide access to the lake.
no,
You don't have to provide access to the lake, only if you want to build a house. So that's your voluntary
Well, I was thinking
decision.
more in terms of what Dave said,
No.
with the density.
I didn't read
credits
it.
or
The
bonuses
second,
or whatever.
the second sentence actually covers what I was concerned about. Anyway.
yeah, I don't think it needs to be included in the policy, because this is a
policy that restricts rather than just provides a provision for inclusion. I mean, the whole process is, a person comes in and they propose something, and then that gets reviewed against
Okay,
code.
I think we're
So,
okay.
All right, let's go to,
The old adage, you got the shovel with you?
as you guys could probably tell, I'd like to get through this implementation component. We can shift all this off to the county commissioners. Community design should be a simple one.
Did we go through housing already?
No, we could do housing. You want to do housing?
Wait a minute. Also.
I didn't really have much in the way of any improvements to housing. The only thing I suggested, and I thought we maybe talked about this last time, was that we add a number 5. We add recreational uses to providing workforce housing. Enable workforce housing in direct proximity to agricultural, commercial, industrial, and recreational
Yeah,
uses.
I think we did talk about that.
Yes.
So I think we actually have done this one.
I think so. I don't know. A couple of them are missing some corrections.
I think on number, he was saying on number 5 policies that he wanted to add, where it says commercial, industrial, and recreational uses. Is that correct?
Or just
Correct.
commercial, comma, recreational, and industrial uses. Don't have to move the and. Those little electrons there, just stuck right there. They don't.
Any other suggestions on housing?
I think it should be manufactured home if we're gonna go.
Yeah,
Mobile is prior to 1970.
right, 73.
Or something like that.
What was that presentation we had?
Yeah. I don't know if we want to encourage mobile homes as much as manufactured home parks.
Right, okay. Even though Lucas still talks about
I know.
home parks. They didn't change it. It says
Trailers.
Somebody, yeah, trailer park. Let's call it, we really call it what it is, a trailer park. There's lots of them, quite a few of them in Sandpoint. Trailer.
Really?
What do they call them? What do they call them now?
Manufactured homes.
No, they had,
Manufactured home community. Yeah, not trailer park. Classic.
Even though there are still some of those dinosaurs in there.
yeah, manufactured. I guess we have to put that in the manufactured.
Yeah. We included the other present day stuff, RVs, tiny homes.
So, recreational vehicle parts, I don't know if we should include this in the housing component, because I don't know if it should be deemed as housing.
I don't think we should.
Oh, yeah, it's recreation by discretion, yeah.
I don't think we want to confuse.
Short of the last previous discussion, what do you do, Panhandle, when you see the summertime RV that's fully skirted and insulated and the car shows up every day and leaves every morning, goes to work, comes home at 4. You know, months. Because it's housing that has to be. I don't know, that's a terrible, terrible situation.
Okay?
All right, so we'll move to community design. My suggestion there, pretty much like a lot of them, was move 2 through 4 policies.
Yeah.
Since I'm new, can somebody help me understand number 1? Just while
Policy.
Jake's catching up with us. To enable a variety of lifestyles. Is that meant to be like, some people want to live in a city lifestyle and some people want to be in a skiing alpine lifestyle? Is that what that's supposed to mean?
Well, there's different areas of the county where, it wasn't that many years ago, old school buses was the norm.
The lifestyle.
That was the lifestyle. And to allow those, that was their lifestyle.
Hippie. That's a lifestyle.
Yep.
This is a very kind of a nebulous component.
Yeah.
It was so nebulous, in fact, that it isn't even in 2005 comp plan.
Really?
Well, a lot of counties will include it throughout the other components.
Right.
So I think Kootenai County did that on a couple of their components they combined.
They just say,
Yeah,
in our,
but they have separate policies like we do here, but they won't have a specific component. They'll include it in the housing component and, you know, yeah.
The one that I do question is policy number 3. Well, what we have here is 3. Allow particularized design standards to address waterfront and mountaintop developments which may differ from standard design objectives. Maybe if someone can explain, what are we talking about here? Because, you know, if someone wants to build on a mountaintop or a waterfront, are we really gonna go ahead and create design standards? Because we never have before.
No, it didn't say create, it says allow. I'll see where it comes from. It's not a component. Some of these sub-area committees also recognize that particularized design standards to address waterfront and mountaintop developments which may differ from the standard design objectives. It came out of some sub-area committees. So we included it.
wait a minute,
Whatever it means.
is that all there is to this component? One page?
I guess what it means is that we're not an HOA. We're not going to have, you have to build a log cabin. You
Right.
can't build a stucco house. We're not going to have those kind of design standards.
Restrictions, right, but that says kind of I understand that to kind of be the opposite.
No, it says allow particularized design standards. They
so we
take
just talked
particularized
about in the
out.
Alpine Zone, there are design standards there that are unique, right? They have unique snow load flats up
Yeah,
there
yeah.
that the rest of the county doesn't have.
Yeah, but
And aren't there similarly unique setbacks for waterfront that the rest of the county doesn't have?
Like a 75,
Well,
well, 40 or
waterfront
something.
setback, and Alpine is different on their parking standards too, we're really strict on that. And then the setbacks for streets are different up there as well because of how narrow, anyway. yeah.
So I mean, I think that's what we were referring to.
That's the entire
Whether that
component?
says that clearly enough
paragraphs
is
of the entire-
So the
another
design
question.
standards here, we're talking about design standards such as
I wrote it.
Why didn't we do that on all?
width to depth, that kind of design standard. We're not talking about the actual
Took me about
architectural
5 minutes.
design.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay,
It's like
okay.
more
Compared to
design
42
standards of
pages of the old
placement
stuff.
versus the placement of other places.
Well, it didn't even have
Okay.
one in the old.
I'm good.
Do we need to
Like,
clarify that?
pitch of roof and, types of siding and everything like that.
Do we want to be more specific?
Well, and there was no explanation why it wasn't included. That's the op, that's
Well,
the out.
because we do have design standards.
You could say to address environmental conditions or concerns.
So this whole component deals with community design. So are we saying that there isn't any community design? We shouldn't have any community design, even though 6508 says we need to have community design?
Unless you justify that it's not necessary.
Oh, that's true.
And
So the county formed 5 sub-area committees to gather input from various areas to determine local goals. Although the component was not addressed as a separate component in most of the plans, some principles were ascertained.
And
Most common was preservation of rural character. To reach the goal, and new development should occur in areas with similar densities and compatible uses. So that's what's in here.
the zoning code talks about, whether it calls it community design or not, but it talks about landscaping between a white wall building and the road and those kind of things, which are all very much urban design.
That's not what this is dealing with.
I know, well, that's what is in today's zoning code for Bonner County, those requirements, but there's no comp plan component to back them up or even talk about it. And that was my argument going in, I think, to that component discussion was, it's an urban thing. How much urban setting do we have and want to have?
What if you just modified this to say design standards that address environmental factors that are unique to waterfront and bottom top? And then you take it the whole, how it looks thing, however.
Yeah,
And that is the purpose.
Well, no, I think there are some design standards that go beyond that. I mean, it's not,
Well,
I guess, maybe, I guess the setback from the water is environmental.
yeah.
I like that change. I think it clarifies what we're talking about, and would prevent it from being interpreted overly broadly.
So let's say particularize, let's say environmental design standards?
I would say I think particularized design standards to address the unique environmental conditions of waterfront and mountaintop developments.
Okay. So,
Environmental conditions. So that would include, for instance, the fact that they get 300 inches of snow a year, right? So don't take environmental the way you may want to think of it right off the bat.
Small e.
Right.
Now 7:30.
Go hit the circuit breaker.
we're almost done, Don, don't worry. Okay, anything else on community design, or could we go to agriculture? Agriculture, I have a couple suggestions. I would move 2 and 3 to policies, and then I would add a policy. And going back and reading through the component, I picked this out. I would say protect environmental quality so that farming continues to be a viable use in the county.
As another goal and objective, is that what you were saying?
As a policy.
As a policy as well.
You know, I listened to of course, I tried to zoom in but couldn't. But the board was making reference to go ahead and having things kind of tied down, not so broad. So when we use that broad statement, very large productive agricultural lands, that is so subjective. We either need to eliminate that or tie that down to an acreage.
Well, the other thing to do is to convince the county commissioners that it shouldn't be tied down to the comp plan, which is what I tried to do fairly unsuccessfully.
I mean,
Yeah, I disagree that it needs to be tied down specifically to a specific acreage or density in the comp plan.
Or the other degree of subjectivity, how productive is it?
Yeah, what's
That's also
productive?
subjective.
Productive agricultural land, that's a very, very subjective.
I mean, because we've had this discussion many times, someone may consider a quarter section, very large. Someone else might only be 20 acres.
Right now, we're babysitting 2 city dogs. They think 10 acres is the backside of the moon.
Sure.
They romp over that and just having a ball.
What if you just said fragmentation of agricultural land?
Well, because then.
That was the gist of it, but even that makes a qualifier.
Yeah, but so let's say you have a 20-acre parcel out there, ag 20. And for whatever reason, they want to go to ag 10 and they meet all the qualifiers and descriptors. That would discourage the fragmentation of any agricultural land.
Yeah.
I think that's just way too.
Yeah, it's too broad,
That's really broad.
even though we got the numbers to back it up.
Discouraged also doesn't mean prohibit.
Yeah, and how do you discourage? That's my
So,
question
well,
all the way
it says,
through
yeah,
this.
Develop policies to discourage.
Develop policies to discourage.
So maybe that even shouldn't even be a policy because it says develop a policy.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's a policy, it's a policy to develop a policy.
Words, and you're done with that.
Thanks.
Just say, start the sentence with
Discourage.
I could do that throughout this whole,
Yeah.
there's a lot of places.
A lot of places.
I harped on that a couple of years ago.
Okay, discourage fragmentation of agricultural lands.
That basically says it, but
That's too broad.
it leaves it wide open. That could be interpret it all kinds of ways. Again, if you're gonna, now, if that's just a objective, under policy, define it.
No, my suggestion was to move it into a policy. And if you move it into a policy, then
Okay.
it should start with discourage.
Yeah, okay, right.
Discourage fragmentation of I think if you say productive agricultural lands, you have people who say, well, it should be limited to productive agricultural lands.
Yeah, any ag land.
I mean,
It kind of goes with what the community has said over and over and over. It's all the suburban plan of keeping things rural. So in a general sense, how do you do that? Well, you try and prevent the fragmentation.
It reads more like an objective right now.
Yeah.
Agricultural land.
And I don't know what the policies would be that would accomplish that anyway.
How do you,
Well,
yeah.
you know, and I keep going back to that USDA, I think you did the agriculture component. Between 2012 and 2017, we grew by 11% in acreage. And from 2017 to 2022, we grew by another 9%.
Doing a pretty good job discouraging the fragmentation of,
Well, but remember, that's total acres
Ag.
under farming or under
Ag
ag.
and-
right?
and
By
ag,
somebody's
correct.
definition and somebody's ledger.
And
Because it's
based on what the
ag.
guy who said when he came and, the guy who worked on the APA came and talked about it, one of my conclusions was it's heavily variable based on who decides to participate on any 5-year interval when they send out the surveys.
Sure.
Because we did see a lot, in the most recent one, we saw a lot of growth in very large farms.
And how they
And I'm pretty
define
sure that people were
active
coming
farms.
in the last 5 years and buying 150 acres and turning it into a farm that weren't here 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that's participation in the survey, probably an artifact of that.
Yeah, but the only thing is, it's consistent, that USDA survey. That's the only thing we have
Yeah,
to use.
it's the best data we have, and I'm a fan of using the best data you have.
What does USDA consider very large?
Oh, I don't know that they define that term. I'd have to go back and look at their survey.
Well, they had
They
categories,
did
didn't they?
categorize it, but they didn't put a name to them. They just
They
said,
just-
they just had broad categories of acreages.
0 to 1,500.
Montana or Massachusetts.
Yeah, well,
Right.
yeah.
and Idaho is rife with the whole array.
Yeah.
5-acre farms or less in Shelly Valley and elsewhere around. Sagal's got bunches of them, up to larger ones up there. And Idaho, my goodness. Down southeast, there's thousands of acres of farm. Way more pertinent down there.
Well, okay, what do you want me to do with this? Do we want to keep it as an objective, not as a
Well,
policy?
the way it's written, it reads like, to me, it's an objective.
An objective.
Yeah, because it's too subjective to have as a policy.
And my first question would be, give me an example of a policy or two that you think would do that.
That would
That
discourage
would accomplish that
fragmentation.
objective.
Okay, well, should we modify it at all? I mean, very large productive, those seem to be we want to keep that in there or not?
Well, from that standpoint, an objective would just say, develop policies to discourage fragmentation of agricultural lands. That's just an objective. Then in a policy, then you'd further define it, not breaking up farm properties over 20 acre, I don't know.
But-
That's where it starts getting crazy.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna.
And what policy could you devise that would
That's why I asked
say
the
you
question.
can't?
Give me an example of a policy or two. that
I
would
know, it
accomplish
just
that
doesn't,
objective.
it sounds ripe, and that's what people suggested. Well, write a policy that says you can't. No, you can't, say you can't. Unless services will not support it. So how do you, that's one avenue to take, is if there's not services to support the division of land, so forth, then,
But we've already covered that.
yeah, that's.
I don't think, you wouldn't cover that separately here. We've already covered that in land use.
I don't know.
All right, so let's just let's keep it as a goal, and we'll take let me just make it of agricultural lands.
I think that, at least that. It's not followed up necessarily by a policy.
That'll make Mr. Bowman happy.
One, it says develop policies, and there's no policy that mimics the goal.
So before we move on, can I, quick question, on the one you added, Alan, protect environmental quality so that farming continues to be viable, instead of the word farming, is agriculture more?
Yes, better word.
Yeah, okay, agriculture, yeah.
I think that's more inclusive.
I think I took that right out of the component, so somewhere. But yeah, agriculture is fine. All right, is there any, have we covered them all?
Yeah. Now, so here's one general, broad statement. We tried to put the reason why in the implementation component, goals and policy, why we're doing this. But I still think that this component, since it's a component of the comp plan, it should reiterate the 6508 instruction for this component and talk about it. And so therefore, this discussion of the implementation component should be at the front, in that sense, of this component. And then the other policies should be listed in order that they are in 6508. Just to give us some connectivity to the rest of the document, the rest of the.
And that was the only comment I'd come up with outside of this, not having some kind of introduction or some context, and that would kind of suffice, I think, what you're saying.
What does 6508 say?
Well, okay. I don't know if I can get to it now.
Because right now, we have, at the beginning, we have a policy statement that says, for the implementation plan was to keep the comprehensive plan
But it's
current.
at the end of the component.
We'll put it at the beginning.
All right, so put it at the
Mine-
beginning.
Actually, mine's at the beginning.
You moved it.
Okay, maybe I moved it.
See, page 17.
Jake, did you hear that?
I didn't move it, I cheated. Okay, so
Okay.
move it to beginning. Says in order to avoid costly belated revisions to the plan, Bonner County needs to set aside a meeting once per year to examine the plan and determine whether updates and revisions are needed. This meeting should be scheduled at the beginning of each year prior to the county's budgeting session so that adequate funding can be addressed if needed.
Okay, that's part of what 6508 requires in this component. But it also goes, and there's good examples around the counties in the state that they did it per the code. So I'm going to zip down here to 6508 and planning duties and implementation, which is, unfortunately, it's the last operative one, known as public airports. An analysis to determine the actions, programs, budgets, ordinances, and other methods, including scheduling of public expenditures to provide for the timely execution of the various components of this plan. That does it partly, but just to inform people of the process. That's part of it, because the process is you review your property against the comp plan, you don't think it fits, you have a process to follow to try to amend the comprehensive plan, either the map or the language.
We don't
something
do
like
what that just says. We don't deal with budgets.
That's the only part in it that we don't. All the rest of it, we could take a stab, and like I said, there's plenty of examples in other county comp plans where they did it, just one, section after another. None of them have budgets, because they talk about CIPs, which applies to capital improvement programs, which applies to cities. So the cities do this. Most of them have. I know when Sandpoint is just going through theirs, they've got a giant capital improvement program that accomplishes the goals of the comp plan. Counties don't do that. What ordinances are going to be put in place? So you can say, just the process. Following this, the Board of County Commissioners will enact ordinances to put zoning code into place, so forth. Just some general, again, information for the reader, which is supposed to be the general public as well as the decision makers. That's all I'm saying. And then the other part, just ordering the component goals and objectives and policies in the same A through Q arrangement that 6508 does. So it's easier to follow. You don't have to go, where are we? Except for putting the
Okay, so why don't you add one?
implementation.
So we already have in your Bonner County needs to develop and maintain an effective zoning enforcement program that the county can ensure that its land use laws are met. That's
Well,
one. So what else should it
that's
be?
a policy.
Right, that's what it says, policy statement.
Right.
Do you have a goal?
No.
Okay, what do you want, what do you want to say? I'm not arguing with you, I'm just.
Okay, I
trying
need
to
an
get-
example. I
What-
need to find, I need to find.
What do it say?
I need to find another example. Somewhere in our literature, our readings, in this whole kit and caboodle, I put in a couple other county comp plans as examples. Remember what those are, Jake? Or was it in my own file, under my own?
No, there's a ton of them in there. Not every one of them, I think Swati left a place where there's.
Yeah, she did, when I suggested it, then she and I looked together and we found a whole bunch of examples. She put them in there, all the different comp plans from around the state.
Yep.
Except one of them was, it was a county in the state, but it was from another state.
Under CP4 readings, research and notes, one that says readings and then comprehensive plan examples.
There we go.
I gotta run down the hall, Mr. Chair. I'll be back. Bye.
Where did you go to find that?
CP4.
CP4.
Readings.
There we go, CP4. I just scrolled down to it.
And then comprehensive plan examples.
Comp
And you,
plan.
hope you remember the county because.
I do.
Which county?
Wait a minute now. Oh, wait a minute. Research and notes readings. Here we go. It was, on my copy at home, I've got it marked. I started reading, I go, wait a minute. Ooh, we haven't looked out the window. The sky's on fire. Ooh. Take a look, Dave.
Oh, I'm so emotional.
Yeah. Okay. Wait a minute, this is a bunch of stuff. Where's all the county comprehensive plans examples? Okay.
I think I found in Blaine County had a bunch of very specific.
Yeah.
But
I'm not sure where you guys are, you've lost me.
No. No, it's,
update. Double click in there.
no, it's Madison County is the right one.
Readings. And go to examples, comp plan examples. Up higher.
It was out of Minnesota or something.
Minnesota?
Yeah.
Cares what they do.
I know, that was the thing. She missed it. She downloaded something that had the name, but she didn't look at it and included it
Well,
in our.
there's Bannock. Why don't we?
That's Idaho.
I know, so is Blaine.
Yep. And
Those
Lake
Ada.
Tahoe.
How about Boundary? Let's go to Boundary.
Yeah, no, Boundary is Boundary.
oh, sorry, Blaine County, I had another good example, not this one. So I can't find my notes for which one I thought was good on.
No, that's not it. No. I got it. Come on. Elmore County. Nope, that's not it. It shows in Idaho. Sorry. False alarm. Don't come running to the station. Well, shoot. I know it's there. Well, anyway. So, pick one and see how they dealt with implementation. That's not a good one. They don't have.
You've got all these comp plans for all the counties memorized, don't you?
Sure.
Just the one that's got a really good implementation section.
I can pick a good one.
Okay, well, here's one, I don't know which, this is Jefferson County. Goals are implementing a comprehensive plan will require financial support and actively engaged planning and zoning commission and systematic coordination with other county regulatory agencies and departments. Is that what you want?
Something like that. I mean, here's Fremont County. They reiterate the code, the state code. And it just says, additional studies, programs, projects, and actions that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends to fulfill the goals of and components of the vision of Fremont County include establishment of a CIP, continued and expanded water quality monitoring. So here's what they said was what they're going to do.
We're not going to do that.
No, but can we say something along the lines that align with 6508?
Why don't we just say what this one says, pretty simple. Implementing the comprehensive plan will require financial support, comma, an active, engaged planning. This is planning and zoning. We'll just say planning for now, until they recombine them. And systematic coordination with other county regulatory agencies and departments. I would say other county and state regulatory agencies and departments.
Yeah.
Got that, Jay?
Which one again?
Policy statement.
Jefferson County implementation plan. Or implementation component. Overview. So really what this one should say, with the county, the way it's structured right now, is that implementing a comprehensive plan will require financial support and actively engaged planning commission and zoning commission, and systematic coordination with other county and state regulatory agencies and departments. How about the county commissioners? They have something to do with it.
Yeah.
So it's an actively engaged planning, zoning, and county commission. You find it, Jake?
It's an interesting one.
I got it there.
So then the policy statement that's here should be, rather than starting out with to keep, I would say the county should maintain the comprehensive plan as a current document and to avoid, to avoid costly belated revisions, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to avoid, take out the and between current and to, towards the end of the first line. Oh, whether you're gonna leave that all as one big sentence? Maybe not.
Oh, to keep the comprehensive plan as a current document.
Versus plan.
To, take out the and just say to avoid.
Would you consider removing regulatory from 3?
Oh, I'm sorry, what are you saying?
If you
Bottom,
remove the word
yeah.
regulatory and just have any, I mean, you might want to interact with agencies and departments that are not.
Yeah, we can take out regulatory.
So, I mean, in number one, I would probably break that first sentence into 2. First sentence, the county should keep the comprehensive plan current to avoid costly belated revisions to the plan, period. County needs to set aside, yeah, exactly, a meeting once a year to examine the plan.
Make that a second one?
Yeah, determine whether updates or revisions are needed.
Yeah, just make that, split it up.
I think that's probably a good way it is.
Can you do that, Jake?
You got it.
All right, so we've been through the implementation component, right?
Yes.
Yep. All right, so can we set this for hearing?
Yep. Did we go through property rights?
Yes.
I thought we did that one of the very first nights.
I didn't have it as red marked, maybe I already accepted those changes, so, okay.
I think we,
You want to change this from policy statement to policies, similar to the other sections?
Yes. Actually, do we do special areas and sites?
any changes noted? Yeah, there's,
Looks like it.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's changes.
I don't have the property rights right here.
I will get the file made this week and get it scheduled for hearing.
Oh, wait a minute. I got maybe one more addition to land use under policies. And I'm just looking, so I know we've had some comments by somebody saying that we have a section 3.3 preservation. We don't have anything in the policies about it. And I was looking at that section, it's real short. And it says Bonner County should also consider, or should consider, say also, should consider avenues to create incentives for land conservation through its zoning and subdivision laws. Preserving unique and natural cultural characteristics and ecosystems should be an important element in the county's land use policies. Recognition of the irreplaceable nature of those areas. Yes.
It's under special sites.
No,
that's under land use?
That would be back under land use. That's what I read is right out of the land use component.
And this is a new policy you're proposing?
Yeah, I
Adding it right out of the
I
component.
had it flagged and I just forgot. It's kind of long. We don't need the whole thing. I'm just wondering if we should have something in there that refers to preservation so we don't get that argument. Well, you don't have anything about preservation.
Yeah, right.
So I think it could just basically, you see where I am, Jake?
The second paragraph under 3.3.
Right, the first two sentences. Take out also in the first line.
find it, Jake?
Yeah, I got it.
No, we just lost the screen, so we can't tell what you're doing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Like, does this look right to you guys? Sorry. I added it here as number 8, and I can put it to the bottom. When you guys edit stuff in Google, it throws the formatting all for a loop on my end when I get it to work. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The county should consider avenues to create incentives for land conservation through its zoning and subdivision laws and the whole second sentence.
Just split those into 2 sentences. Oh, yep, no, you're good, never mind.
Yeah, so if you guys are agreeable with that,
Yeah,
I think we're, do you want to, just for kicks, would you want to pull up the property rights, just to make sure?
The implementation.
Pardon me?
section, which property rights, the component or the section in implementation?
The implementation component.
Right.
I'm a little bit concerned that the second statement in that, what we just added, could be interpreted very broadly.
What, which one?
In that, going back to land use in that policy that we just added. The first sentence in that, I'm okay with. Preserving unique natural and cultural features and ecosystems should be an important element of the community's land use policies. There are people who would argue that the entire county is a unique ecosystem.
Yeah,
That's true.
they would argue, but,
Well,
yeah, I know.
I understand, but
Do you want to take it
but
down?
my fear is we're opening a door to
Yeah.
have that discussion.
Okay, we'll
over
take
and
the second
over and
sentence
over.
out.
Qualifiers.
Yeah. I mean, that section on preservation, it starts out by specifically talking about really unique sites.
Yeah.
Right? And it's, you know, I think it's talking about ancient sites, you know.
Basically, special areas.
Special areas, yeah.
What is land conservation? I mean,
Yeah,
what
right.
does that mean?
Don't eliminate land.
Exactly, right. How do you make land go away other than with a shovel and it's still there anyway?
Somewhere else. You move it from one place to another, yeah.
But that's a
That's
serious
always been
question.
a-
What, is that a term of art or something that?
I guess I interpreted that it was.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
old term that's
Ask-
been around
ask-
forever, but it's never been
That's
defined.
George.
No, I'm that's George.
Land
But
conservation.
is it a term of art? Is that in this?
It's an NRCS term, land conservation. Don't erode it, don't send it down the river, so that's where it comes from, but I don't know.
So instead of land conservation, what if we said, the county should consider avenues to create incentives to preserve, and go back and refer to what we talk about, the unique,
Natural and cultural features and ecosystems? That's kind of combining the first sentence and the second sentence is what you're getting at?
well,
Or does it just
I would
flash
talk
back to
about,
rural environment?
because the first paragraph, I'm going back to the actual component. And it talks about the fact that we have various significant archaeological, ecological, wildlife, and scenic sites that have been recognized in Bonner County as unique and important to preserve. And that, I think, is what we should be referring to here. The policies to preserve those significant, unique, archaeological, ecological.
Historical.
Historical probably would be a good one to add in there, scenic sites.
Or the language from the component again.
Right.
I think that's fine.
Should be working.
I think that's fine. I just, my
Yeah, I know
point,
you just.
my point was just to have something in there.
Yeah, yeah.
So our mystery county is Lewis County.
Too late.
How do you want to read there, Dave?
We already went to Jefferson.
Yeah, well, Lewis is the one that isn't even in Idaho. It's in Washington.
Oh.
Look up the land use, it
Yes.
pictures of tulip
Or
gardens,
that
giant,
historical?
300-acre
One
tulip
of
farms.
historical.
Yeah, historical is a fine addition to that list.
Yeah.
I'm not, in reality, in the county, that may be a little bit redundant with archaeological, but that's fine.
Yeah, not necessarily, because that goes back to prehistoric time.
You know, we referenced those that have been recognized in the county. Do we have a list of those?
Yep. Chippo does.
Well, we said we were going to develop a list
Well,
when we're getting to special
yeah.
areas and sites.
And then we're gonna get that from the.
And we're going to get that from the Historical
Secret
Society.
list. That's kept in the bottom left drawer with a lot.
That's what we said. I don't know if we've done it, but that's what we said.
State Historic Preservation Office has it, and they let it out very guardedly, only to professional archaeologists. So forth.
Let anybody know. I guess that's a policy to preserve it.
Exactly.
You preserve the list.
You don't know where it is, you can't go ruin it.
That's right. Exactly. You can't go steal parts of it because you want it for your.
All right,
dressing room.
so the next meeting is on the MLDs and what, family
sixth?
exemptions?
Yeah.
Or not?
That's going to be fun.
There'll be, okay. So we're putting together a lot of data to help we do this analysis. I have 3 drafts of a proposed code change. And then I have some brainstorming notes from our planning discussions on this. We also have a list of all the family exemptions, and whether or not they have changed hands in the last 10 years. So essentially, is there a problem with, someone giving it to a kid and kid turning around and selling it? So if that's even an issue we need to solve. I also created a list of all the new lots creations since 2019 to current, based on each type of land division. So I tried to pull out the ones that were expired or denied. I can't tell you it's 100% accurate, but it's the best I was able to get done in about 4 hours on it. So.
You know, we've been talking about this for years, and I know Rob can't do it. It'd be very interesting to see how many of those family exemption, MLD, short plats, and subdivisions, how many parcels were created, how many actually have single-family dwellings sitting on them now.
Oh, right.
Because I remember a lot of people were, they were going nuts. They were saying, 70-some% of all parcels created through MLD now have homes on it. But we kind of discussed that a couple of years, maybe about a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And I think we estimated it's more in the 30-some% range.
I think we have, in our land use analysis tool, we talked about platted lands. Because I don't know if we have a specific mapped, like by land division type.
Right.
But I think we can look at it by plats and by year and see how that's changed. I think it would be a pretty.
MLDs don't have a plat?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're plats. And family exemptions or family land divisions are unplatted. So those are the data sources we're looking at now, and I'll try to get everything to you guys by the end of the week. I'm going to brainstorm and review the current drafts, the 3 different options with my planners tomorrow, and hopefully refine that and get it to you by the end of the week so you can start reviewing it before Tuesday.
Yeah, the sooner you can get it to us, the better, so we can have a chance to review it. The sooner the better, so we have a chance to take a look at it before the meeting.
I'll get it to you by Friday at the latest, hopefully by Thursday. The board wanted us to add the waiver of land divisions, which is an unplatted 20-acre lot creation, just as a part of the discussion, not necessarily making any changes, but just be aware of these different types of administrative land divisions. So really what we're going to be discussing, the majority is minor land divisions, and then the family exemption code, the family land division code, and the waiver of land division. We also have just some general notes of ideas in the general subdivision, other areas in chapter 6 that aren't included in those 3 different file types. So whether or not we want to try to implement those sometime in the future. Part of this review from planning staff kind of brought up a whole other types of ideas we can try to solve.
If we're not going to do anything, why are we reviewing the waiver? It's a good idea, not a good idea?
There's some, yeah, so there could be some rationale to add some kind of application or other standard review for this. And really, that's the idea, is just to look over the code and, you know, what do we want to do with it? Are we fine with it the way it is? And what standards are?
So how's it work now?
Want to get into it? now or
No, I
next
don't.
Tuesday?
Sorry.
I can go into it.
All right, so we're gonna have a meeting on, what is that?
Monday the 5th.
Today's the 29th.
Oh, yeah, we got the Monday meeting.
Monday the 5th.
Yeah, so we have,
and then Thursday.
we have a workshop with the county commissioners Monday.
4th.
At
The 5th at 1:30.
That's the 5th.
Monday the 5th at 1:30. So I guess we're adjourned until then, and then we'll have another meeting on the 6th at 4:30 to deal with some of these code issues. So